Have you ever noticed how life seems to follow strange, invisible rules? Like how everything goes wrong at the worst possible time, how people act differently when they know they're being watched, or how the harder you try to hide something, the more attention it gets. These aren't just coincidences. They're powerful, time-tested principles that shape how we think, behave, and live. So, buckle up, because once you understand how these hidden laws work, you'll start seeing the world in a whole new light. Murphy's Law, the inevitability of chaos. Picture this. You wake up late because your alarm didn't go off. You reach for your phone. Dead battery. You rush to the bathroom, squeeze the toothpaste tube, and nothing. You grab your bag, sprint to the bus stop only to see the bus pulling away just as you arrive. Frustrating. Absolutely. But surprising. Not if you know Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. It sounds like an exaggeration, but once you start paying attention, you'll see it everywhere. A simple coffee spill turns into a ruined shirt, which leads to a missed interview, which somehow spirals into an entire day of misfortunes. It's as if the universe conspires against you. But why does this happen? Murphy's Law is not about bad luck, it's about complexity. The world is full of interconnected systems, and small errors have a way of cascading into disasters. Think of NASA's Apollo 13 mission. A single faulty wire in an oxygen tank led to an explosion that almost cost the astronauts their lives. The engineers had planned for everything, but not that one tiny detail. This law isn't just about accepting that things will go wrong. It's about preparing for them. Airplane pilots have backup plans for their backup plans because they know that if something can fail, it probably will. The best way to beat Murphy's Law is to anticipate failure before it happens. And sometimes, the things that go wrong are just life rerouting you towards something better. Maybe missing that bus saved you from being caught in a storm. Maybe spilling your coffee led to a conversation with someone important. Murphy's Law teaches us two things. Be prepared and don't take life's mishaps too seriously, because in the end, chaos is just part of the adventure. Hanlon's razor. Malice or just incompetence. Have you ever sent a polite email only to receive a cold or hostile response? Or held the door open for someone and they didn't even say thank you? It's easy to assume people are rude, inconsiderate, or even out to get you. But what if they're just clueless? That's where Hanlon's razor comes in. Never attribute to malice that which can be explained by incompetence. Let's think about it. You're at work, and your boss makes a decision. That seems completely irrational. Is he trying to ruin your life? Probably not. It's far more likely that he's just not great at his job. The same goes for customer service mishaps, bureaucratic delays, and even political blunders. More often than not, what seems like an evil plot is just a mix of forgetfulness, bad planning, or simple human error. One of the best examples of Hanlon's razor in action is large corporations. Have you ever been on hold with customer service for what feels like an eternity? It's tempting to think, they don't care about me. But the reality is more boring. They probably just don't have enough staff, or their system is outdated. It's not a conspiracy. It's just inefficiency. This principle can change how you see the world. Instead of assuming the worst, it encourages you to pause and ask, could this just be a mistake? People aren't always plotting against you. Sometimes they're just distracted, uninformed, or overwhelmed. The next time someone cuts you off in traffic, consider this. Are they being a jerk, or are they just having a bad day? Hanlon's razor won't fix every misunderstanding, but it will make life a little less frustrating. Because when you start assuming incompetence instead of ill intent, the world becomes a much less hostile place. The Pareto Principle. Why everyone eventually becomes incompetent. Imagine a hard-working employee. Let's call him Tom. Tom is great at his job, so his company promotes him. He does well in his new role, so he gets promoted again. This keeps happening until one day Tom reaches a position where he's completely out of his depth. He struggles, makes poor decisions, and suddenly, he's terrible at his job. What happened? Welcome to the Peter Principle. People rise to their level of incompetence. In most organizations, employees get promoted based on their performance in their current role, not their potential to succeed in the next one. A fantastic software developer becomes a terrible manager. A brilliant doctor is promoted to hospital administrator, even though they have no leadership skills. The result? Over time, companies fill up with managers and executives who are completely unqualified for their positions. This phenomenon is everywhere. Have you ever had a boss who seemed totally clueless? They might have been excellent at their previous job, but got promoted one step too far. This is why some companies keep their best employees exactly where they are, because the moment they move up, they might stop being effective. So, what's the solution? Some companies combat the Peter Principle by offering alternative career paths that allow talented people to progress without becoming managers. But for most people, the key is self-awareness. Before saying yes to a promotion, ask yourself, do I really want this job? Or do I just want the title and the raise? Because the higher you climb, the harder it is to step back down. The Peter Principle is a warning. Success isn't just about climbing the ladder, it's about knowing when to stop. The Dilbert Principle. Why the worst employees become bosses. Imagine you work in a company where there's one employee who seems to mess up everything they touch. They can't meet deadlines, they don't understand basic tasks, and somehow, they have a way of making the simplest problems worse. You assume they'll get fired soon, but then something shocking happens. They get promoted. How? Why? This is the Dilbert Principle in action. Companies systematically promote their least competent employees into management to limit the damage they can do elsewhere. Yes, you heard that right. The theory suggests that instead of firing bad employees, companies move them into leadership roles where they don't have to handle important work anymore. The idea is that an incompetent manager does less harm than an incompetent worker on the ground floor who directly affects productivity. Sounds ridiculous, right? But think about it. Have you ever had a boss who seemed completely disconnected from reality? Who sat in meetings talking about vision and strategy while avoiding actual decision-making? Who had no idea how the company's products even worked? There's a good chance they were promoted not because they were good at their job, but because they were bad at it. This principle is so widespread that it became the foundation for the famous Dilbert comic strip, created by Scott Adams. He noticed that in many companies, leadership positions weren't given to the most talented or hard-working people, but to those who were simply too much of a liability elsewhere. So, what does this mean for you? First, if you ever wonder why so many managers seem incompetent, now you know. And second, if you're ever offered a promotion, think twice. Are you being rewarded for your skills, or are they just trying to move you out of the way? The best way to avoid becoming a Dilbert-style manager is to always keep learning, and never stop doing real work no matter how high you climb. Pareto Principle, the 80-20 rule. Why a small effort creates most results. Take a moment to think about your daily routine. Out of all the things you do, how many of them actually make a difference? You probably spend hours answering emails, attending meetings, and checking notifications. But when you look at what truly drives success, only a handful of tasks really matter. That's the Pareto Principle in action. 80% of results come from 20% of the effort. Named after Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto, who discovered that 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of the population, this rule applies to almost everything in life. In business, 80% of profits usually come from 20% of customers. In sports, 80% of wins often come from 20% of players. Even in relationships, 80% of your happiness probably comes from just 20% of the people you interact with. Once you recognize this pattern, everything changes. Instead of wasting time on low-impact tasks, you can focus on the few things that truly drive results. If you're studying, you don't need to read an entire textbook. 20% of the key concepts will likely be responsible for 80% of your understanding. If you are running a business, identifying the 20% of customers who bring in most of your revenue can help you grow much faster. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The Pareto Principle is not just about working less. It's about working smart. It's about realizing that success isn't about doing more. It's about doing less of the things that don't matter and more of the things that do. The next time you feel overwhelmed, ask yourself, what's the 20% that truly moves the needle? Find that, and you'll accomplish more with less effort. Parkinson's Law. Why work always takes longer than it should. Have you ever noticed that if you have an entire week to complete a simple task, it somehow takes the whole week? But if you're given just 1 hour, you manage to finish it in an hour. That's Parkinson's Law at work. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. This principle was first coined by British naval historian Cyril Northcote Parkinson, who observed that as bureaucracies grow, they become less efficient. But this isn't just a problem for governments or corporations. It happens in our everyday lives, too. Think about a student with a 10-page essay due in a month. They start slowly, procrastinate, and only in the last few days do they finally start writing. If they had been given just 1 week instead of a month, they probably would have still finished it, because the deadline forces efficiency. The same happens at work. A report that could be written in 2 hours suddenly stretches across several meetings and endless revisions because the deadline allows it. The more time you give a task, the more unnecessary work gets added. So, how do you beat Parkinson's Law? By setting artificial deadlines. If you have a project due in 2 weeks, pretend it's due in 3 days. You'll be amazed at how much you can accomplish when you force yourself to work with urgency. This law is also why some of the most successful companies operate under tight deadlines. When Apple was developing the iPhone, Steve Jobs insisted on extremely short production cycles, because he knew that if engineers were given too much time, they would overcomplicate things. By keeping the schedule tight, they got things done faster and more efficiently. The takeaway? If you want to be productive, don't give yourself too much time. Set shorter deadlines, work faster, and avoid letting tasks drag on. Because the longer you give yourself, the longer it will take. Dunning-Kruger Effect. Why the less you know, the more confident you are. Imagine walking into a gym for the first time. You lift a few weights, feel strong, and suddenly think, this isn't so hard. I could be a personal trainer. But then, after a few months, you start realizing how little you actually know. You hear about muscle imbalances, nutrition science, and advanced training techniques, and suddenly, you feel like a complete beginner again. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect. The less competent you are, the more confident you feel. It's a cognitive bias where people with little knowledge overestimate their ability, while experts, who understand the depth of a subject, often doubt themselves. This explains why beginners in any field tend to be the most vocal. A person who has read 1 book on investing suddenly acts like a stock market guru. A new programmer who has just finished a few tutorials thinks they're ready to build the next Facebook. Meanwhile, real experts who have spent years mastering their craft often hesitate to claim they know it all, because they understand just how much there is to know. We see this everywhere, from social media debates to corporate meetings. The loudest person in the room is often the least informed. But recognizing this effect can help you in 2 ways. Stay humble. No matter how much you think you know, there's always more to learn. Be skeptical. Just because someone speaks with confidence doesn't mean they're right. The best way to beat the Dunning-Kruger Effect? Keep learning. The more you know, the more you'll realize how much you don't know, and that's a sign of real intelligence. Cunningham's Law. The best way to get the right answer is to be wrong. Imagine you're in a heated discussion with a friend about history. You confidently declare, "The Great Wall of China was built in the 1400s," when in fact it dates back much earlier. Suddenly, someone nearby chimes in, eager to correct you, listing every detail about its construction and evolution. Now, you've learned the correct answer, not by asking a question, but by confidently stating something wrong. This is Cunningham's Law in action. The best way to get the right answer on the internet is not to ask a question, but to post the wrong answer. This phenomenon is especially powerful in the digital age. If you post a question online, people might ignore it. But if you post an incorrect statement, people will rush to correct you. Humans have an inherent need to fix errors, especially when they see them written in public. The internet thrives on this principle. Just look at how quickly someone corrects a tweet, a Reddit post, or a YouTube comment when it contains a mistake. But this isn't just a trick for getting answers. It's a reflection of human psychology. People don't always respond to requests for help, but they love to prove someone else wrong. This is why social media debates explode when someone posts something incorrect, while genuine questions often go unnoticed. So, how can you use this law to your advantage? If you need information, don't just ask. Take a guess, even if you're unsure. If you're in a meeting and want input, make a bold statement rather than an open-ended question. The instinct to correct will kick in, and suddenly you'll have more answers than you ever expected. Just be careful if you play this trick too often, people might start thinking you're clueless. Goodhart's Law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Imagine you're running a company and you want to improve customer service. You introduce a new rule. Support agents must respond to every email within 24 hours. At first, it seems like a great idea, until you realize that employees are now sending quick, unhelpful replies just to meet the deadline. The goal was better service, but all you got was a meaningless statistic. This is Goodhart's Law in action. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. This law explains why performance metrics, once they become rigid goals, often stop being useful. Schools introduce standardized testing to measure learning, but teachers end up teaching to the test rather than focusing on real education. Hospitals set targets for reducing wait times, but instead of improving efficiency, they just rush patients through the system. Goodhart's Law is everywhere. Corporations, governments, even personal habits. Have you ever set a goal to read 50 books a year? At first, it's about learning, but soon it becomes about hitting the number. You rush through books without absorbing anything. The metric replaces the original purpose. So, how do you fight this? By remembering that numbers are just tools, not the goal itself. Instead of blindly chasing metrics, focus on what those numbers are supposed to represent. Otherwise, you might find yourself hitting targets that don't actually mean anything. Hofstadter's Law. Everything takes longer than you. Expect you sit down to work on a project thinking, this will take 2 hours. 4 hours later, you're still nowhere near done. Sound familiar? That's Hofstadter's Law at work. It always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's Law. This law captures the universal truth that projects, tasks, and even simple to-do lists always expand beyond our expectations. It's not just about procrastination. It's about how humans consistently underestimate the time things will take, even when they know they are underestimating. Take software development, for example. Programmers set deadlines for new features, but delays always happen. They factor in extra time, but even that isn't enough. Why? Because unforeseen problems always appear. Construction projects are the same. How often do buildings finish exactly on schedule? Almost never. So, what can we do about Hofstadter's law? First, accept it. Everything will take longer than expected, so build that into your planning. If you think a task will take a day, assume 2. If a project is estimated to take 6 months, prepare for 9. And second, don't beat yourself up when things run late. It's not just you, it's everyone. Even the best planners in the world fall into this trap. The more we accept that time estimation is flawed, the more we can work around it. And when things inevitably take longer than planned, we won't be surprised. The Lindy Effect. The longer something lasts, the longer it will last. Imagine you're walking through a bookstore and you see 2 books on a shelf. One is a trendy new release that everyone is talking about, and the other is an ancient classic that has been read for centuries. If you had to bet on which book would still be read 100 years from now, which would you choose? According to the Lindy Effect, the answer is clear. The older book is more likely to survive. The longer something has been around, the longer it is likely to continue existing. This principle applies to ideas, traditions, businesses, and even technologies. If a book, a piece of music, or a philosophy has lasted for centuries, it's probably not going anywhere anytime soon. Shakespeare, Socrates, and the Bible have survived for hundreds or thousands of years, while most bestsellers today will be forgotten in a decade. The same applies to businesses. A startup that's only 2 years old has a high risk of failing, but a company that has been around for 50 years is likely to last for another 50. Why? Because things that survive the test of time usually do so for a reason. They have proven value. The Lindy Effect is a powerful tool for making decisions. If you want to invest your time in something that will last, look at what has already stood the test of time. Want to get stronger? Don't chase the latest workout fad. Stick to basic weightlifting, which has worked for generations. Want to read a great book? Skip the trends and pick a classic. Understanding this law helps us avoid wasting time on things that are here today, gone tomorrow. The old saying is true. What is new is often temporary, but what has endured is likely to endure, even longer. Godwin's Law. The inevitable Hitler comparison. If you've spent any time on the internet, you've seen it happen. A discussion starts about politics, economics, or even something as trivial as movie rankings. At first, people make rational arguments. But as the debate continues, tempers rise, logic disappears, and suddenly someone says, "This is exactly how Hitler started." Congratulations, you've just witnessed Godwin's Law in action. As an online discussion grows longer, the probability of a comparison involving Hitler approaches 100%. No matter the topic, taxes, social media policies, fashion trends, if an argument lasts long enough, someone will eventually bring up the Nazis. This isn't because every discussion is actually related to World War II, but because people tend to use the most extreme historical comparison they can think of when they run out of valid points. This law shows how debates often collapse under their own weight. When someone resorts to a Hitler comparison, it usually means rational discussion has ended. It's a sign that emotions have taken over, and no real progress is being made. Understanding Godwin's Law is useful for 2 reasons. First, if you see it happening, you know the argument is no longer productive. Second, if you feel like making that comparison yourself, take a step back. If your best argument is, "This is like the Nazis," you might want to rethink your position. So next time you're in an online debate and someone makes a dramatic Hitler comparison, just smile. You've seen Godwin's Law at work, and you know it's time to walk away. Brandolini's Law, the Bullshit Asymmetry Principle. Why lies spread faster than truth. Imagine you're scrolling through social media, and you see a post that says, "Drinking lemon water every morning cures cancer." It's got thousands of likes and shares. But as someone who knows a thing or two about science, you realize this is completely false. You start typing a reply to correct the misinformation, but then you stop. Because how do you even begin to explain all the reasons this claim is wrong? This is the problem described by Brandolini's law. The amount of energy needed to refute. Bullshit is an order of magnitude larger than the energy needed to produce it. It takes seconds to make a false claim, but it takes minutes, hours, or even days to debunk it properly. Lies, conspiracy theories, and misinformation spread like wildfire because they're easy to digest, while truth often requires context, evidence, and critical thinking. This principle explains why social media is filled with misleading information. Fake news is exciting, dramatic, and simple. Meanwhile, fact-checking is boring, complicated, and time-consuming. People are more likely to share the catchy falsehood than read through a long explanation of why it's wrong. So, what can we do? First, recognize that not every piece of misinformation is worth arguing about. Some myths will never die, no matter how much evidence is presented. Second, when fighting misinformation, use simple, clear, and engaging explanations. If the truth is too complicated, people will ignore it. Brandolini's law reminds us that battling misinformation is a never-ending fight. But if we want to live in a world that values truth, it's a fight worth taking on. Amara's law. Why we overestimate short-term tech and underestimate long-term impact. Think back to the year 2000. People thought flying cars and humanoid robots would be everywhere by now. Meanwhile, no one predicted that social media, smartphones, and artificial intelligence would completely reshape the world. This is Amara's law at work. We tend to overestimate the short-term effects of technology and underestimate the long-term effects. When a new technology emerges, people assume it will change everything overnight. This leads to hype cycles. Remember when everyone thought 3D TVs would be the future? But at the same time, truly revolutionary technologies sneak up on us. The Internet didn't seem like a big deal in the 1990s, yet today it shapes every aspect of our lives. This law applies to everything from artificial intelligence to cryptocurrency. People expect instant revolutions, but real change happens gradually. The impact of AI won't be just in the next 2 years, it will be in the next 20. The lesson here is patience. Just because a technology doesn't immediately live up to the hype doesn't mean it won't be world-changing in the long run. Instead of chasing every new trend, look for the technologies that quietly reshape industries over decades. That's where the real revolution happens. Mersenne's law. 90% of everything is crap. You walk into a bookstore, excited to find a great novel. There are thousands of books on the shelves, but as you start flipping through them, you realize something frustrating. Most of them aren't that good. In fact, many of them are downright terrible. You wonder, how did so much bad writing get published? This is Mersenne's law, also known as Sturgeon's law. 90% of everything is crap. This applies to books, movies, music, TV shows, and even people's opinions. The vast majority of content out there is mediocre or worse, while only a small percentage is truly exceptional. Think about Hollywood movies. Every year, dozens of big-budget films are released, but how many of them are actually good? Maybe 10%. The same goes for YouTube videos, news articles, and even scientific research. Most of it is forgettable, but a small fraction rises above the noise. But here's the good news. Once you accept this law, you stop feeling frustrated about the amount of bad content in the world. Instead, you start focusing on finding the rare gems. If you want to read great books, don't pick them randomly. Seek recommendations from people who know what they're talking about. If you want to watch great movies, don't just follow the hype. Look at which ones have stood the test of time. Understanding Mersenne's law also helps if you're a creator. Don't expect everything you make to be amazing, even the best. Writers, filmmakers, and artists produce a lot of garbage before they create something brilliant. The key is to keep creating and refining, knowing that the 10% of greatness is what matters. So the next time you're drowning in a sea of mediocrity, don't get discouraged. Just remember, most of everything is bad, but that 10% is worth searching for. Shirky Principle. Why organizations resist solving problems. Imagine you work for a big corporation and you notice something inefficient. Maybe there's a pointless approval process or a software system that wastes time. You suggest a simple fix, thinking your boss will be thrilled. Instead, they ignore you. Worse, they seem annoyed that you even brought it up. This is the Shirky Principle at work. Institutions will try to preserve the problem to which they are the solution. It sounds counterintuitive, but many organizations don't actually want to fix the problems they claim to be solving, because those problems justify their existence. A government agency created to fight poverty might not be thrilled if poverty is completely solved, because then they would have no reason to exist. A tech company that sells cybersecurity software benefits from a world full of cyber threats. This explains why bureaucracies never seem to get smaller and why some corporate policies make no sense. If a department is built to fix a problem, solving that problem means losing jobs, budgets, and influence. So instead, they focus on managing the problem, not eliminating it. What can you do with this knowledge? First, recognize when an organization isn't really interested in change. If you're suggesting a brilliant fix but getting resistance, you might be up against the Shirky Principle. Second, if you work in an industry that thrives on problems, be honest about whether you're actually solving them or just maintaining them. The best way to fight this principle is to focus on real impact, even if it means making yourself less necessary. Because the truth is, the people who actually solve problems are the ones who create the most lasting value. Hick's Law. The more choices you have, the slower. You decide you're at a restaurant, and the waiter hands you a massive menu with dozens of options. You start flipping through it, overwhelmed. Should you get pasta, a burger, sushi? Every option sounds good, but the more you think, the harder it becomes to decide. When the waiter finally comes back, you panic and blurt out, I'll just have the chicken. Congratulations, you've just experienced Hick's Law. The more choices you have, the longer it takes to make a decision. This principle explains why supermarkets are designed the way they are, why simple restaurant menus are often more effective, and why minimalist web design is so popular. When people are given too many options, they freeze, they hesitate, they struggle to commit. Think about online shopping. If you search for black sneakers and get 5,000 results, how do you choose? You scroll endlessly, reading reviews, comparing prices, until you either give up or pick something at random. This law has massive implications for business, design, and productivity. Companies that understand Hick's Law simplify choices for their customers. Apple, for example, doesn't overwhelm you with hundreds of products. They give you a handful of options, making it easier to choose. If you want to make better decisions in life, reduce the number of choices you give yourself. Limit your options when ordering food. Cut down your wardrobe to essentials. Instead of browsing every possible workout routine, just pick one and stick with it. The less time you spend deciding, the more time you can spend doing. Foote's Law. If something works, it's not stupid. You're watching someone fix a broken chair by using duct tape and zip ties. It looks ridiculous, but it holds up perfectly. You laugh, but then you remember, it works. This is Foote's Law. If it looks stupid but works, it's not stupid. This principle applies to engineering, problem-solving, and even life itself. Some of the best ideas in history seemed dumb at first. WD-40, the famous lubricant, was created on the 40th attempt, because every previous version failed. Post-it notes were invented by accident when someone was trying to create a super strong glue, but ended up with a weak adhesive instead. In sports, athletes develop weird training techniques that look silly but give them an edge. In business, companies make unconventional decisions that seem crazy but turn out to be genius. When Airbnb first started, the idea of letting strangers sleep in your house sounded ridiculous. Now, it's a billion-dollar industry. The takeaway: don't judge ideas by how they look, judge them by whether they work. If a strange system or method gets results, then it's not stupid. It's just unconventional. Some of the best solutions in life aren't elegant, polished, or expected. But as long as they work, they're just as valuable as the most sophisticated alternatives. So the next time you see someone using a paperclip to fix a broken zipper, or a car held together by zip ties, don't laugh. It might look ridiculous, but if it works, it's not stupid. O'Toole's commentary. Murphy was an optimist. You think Murphy's law is bad? Imagine something even worse. At least Murphy only said that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But what if things that shouldn't go wrong also go wrong? That's the world according to O'Toole's commentary. Murphy was an optimist. This takes Murphy's law to the next level. Not only will things fail, but they will fail in ways you never even imagined possible. If you've ever tried to install a simple piece of software only to have it crash your entire system, you've experienced O'Toole's commentary. If you've ever fixed one problem in your house only to discover two new ones, this law was at work. In real life, this principle applies to everything from corporate strategies to personal projects. Companies invest millions in new systems to improve efficiency, only to create new inefficiencies. Governments introduce laws to fix a problem, only to create bigger ones. What's the takeaway? Expect failure, not in a negative way, but in a strategic way. The best planners in the world don't just prepare for things to go wrong, they prepare for things to go catastrophically wrong. And when failure happens, don't be shocked, just adjust and move forward. Because if Murphy was an optimist, then maybe the real secret to success is being a realist. Sayre's Law, the pettiness of academic conflicts. If you've ever witnessed a heated argument between two professors about something that seems completely insignificant, you've seen Sayre's Law in action. Academic disputes are so vicious because the stakes are so small. This applies not just to academia, but to any environment where people are fighting over status rather than substance. The smaller the stakes, the more intense the battle. Why? Because when the outcome actually matters, people stay rational. But when the stakes are low, when people are arguing over pride, recognition, or ego, the gloves come off. Look at office politics. People in a company may barely react to a major strategic shift, but when it comes to something trivial, like where the coffee machine should be placed, suddenly emotions run wild, or take the internet. The most aggressive debates aren't over world-changing issues. They're over whether pineapple belongs on pizza, or whether a movie adaptation was faithful enough to the book. People love fighting about things that don't matter because their ego is at stake, not actual consequences. The lesson: be careful where you spend your energy. The most dramatic battles are often the least important ones. And if you find yourself caught in a debate that's getting out of control, ask yourself, does this even matter? If the answer is no, step back and let the small minds keep fighting. Schelling Point. Unspoken agreements. Imagine you and a friend get separated in a crowded city with no way to communicate. Where do you go to find each other? Without discussing it in advance, you might both instinctively head to the tallest. Landmark, the Eiffel Tower in Paris, Times Square in New York, or Big Ben in London. This is Schelling's point. People naturally coordinate by choosing an obvious focal point even without communication. This is why travelers who get lost often find each other at famous landmarks. It's why, if you and a friend pick a restaurant separately, you might both choose the same popular spot. It's why businesses naturally cluster in certain areas, why Silicon Valley became the place for tech companies, or why Wall Street became the center of finance. Schelling points are everywhere in human decision-making. In negotiations, both sides might instinctively settle on a fair middle ground. In dating, people meet at socially understood, safe locations. Even in video games, players often gather at key points on a map, even without being told to do so. Understanding this principle can make you a better strategist. If you need to coordinate with someone but can't communicate, ask yourself, what's the obvious choice? If you want to attract people to a new idea or business, ask, where is the natural meeting place? When you think in terms of Schelling points, you can predict human behavior without ever saying a word. Benford's law, the strange math of real life. If you collect a random set of real-world numbers, prices, populations, bank balances, you'd expect all digits, 1 to 9, to appear equally often at the beginning of those numbers, right? Surprisingly, they don't. According to Benford's law, about 30% of all real-world numbers start with 1. Meanwhile, fewer numbers start with 9. This law sounds bizarre, but it's been observed in everything from electricity bills to scientific data. It even helps catch fraud. When people fake numbers, they tend to distribute digits evenly, but real data doesn't work that way. That's why auditors use Benford's law to detect financial fraud. If someone's tax return or election results don't follow the expected digit pattern, something suspicious might be happening. But why does this happen? The answer lies in logarithmic growth. Many natural systems grow multiplicatively rather than linearly. A small company with 100 customers doesn't grow to 200, then 300. It grows to 1,000, then 10,000. As a result, numbers that start with 1 appear more frequently in the early stages of growth. This is one of those hidden patterns in life that most people never notice, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. From stock prices to social media followers, Benford's law shows that even randomness has structure, and if you understand it, you can spot things that others miss. Lotka's law, a small number of people do most of the work. Ever notice how in any group project 1 or 2 people do most of the work while the rest barely contribute? That's Lotka's law in action. A small minority of contributors produce the majority of the output. This applies to almost every field: science, art, business, even social media. A few researchers publish most of the papers. A handful of musicians produce the most popular songs. The top 1% of YouTubers get most of the views. This is not just about skill. It's about exponential effort. The most productive people don't just work twice as hard as the average person. They work 10 times as hard. They obsess over their craft. And because their experience compounds over time, their output skyrockets. Lotka's law is both inspiring and humbling. It means that if you want to excel in any field, you don't need to be the most talented. You just need to produce more work than anyone else. Keep writing. Keep building. Keep learning. The more you create, the more you separate yourself from the pack. And if you're ever frustrated by people who don't pull their weight in a group project, just remember, Lotka's law predicted it. Metcalfe's law, the power of networks. Imagine you're the first person in the world to own a telephone. It's revolutionary technology, but completely useless because there's no one to call. Then, one more person gets a phone. Now, there's some value. As more and more people join, the system becomes exponentially more useful. This is Metcalfe's law. The value of a network increases with the square of the number of its users. Think about social media. If only 10 people were on Facebook, it wouldn't be valuable. But when everyone is on Facebook, it becomes impossible to ignore. The same applies to WhatsApp, email, or even cryptocurrencies. The more users they have, the more valuable they become. But there's a dark side to this law. Just as a network's value grows as more people join, so does its potential for chaos. A small chat group is manageable. A giant social platform can become overwhelming with misinformation, spam, and trolls. For businesses, Metcalfe's law explains why companies fight so hard to dominate their industry. If your network reaches critical mass, it becomes self-sustaining. That's why Apple's ecosystem, from iPhones to Macs, keeps people locked in. Once a network becomes the standard, switching becomes almost impossible. The lesson: if you want to create something powerful, build a network, not just a product. The more people connect to what you offer, the more indispensable it becomes. Gresham's law: bad money drives out. Good: imagine you have two coins in your pocket. One is pure gold, the other is cheap metal but looks almost identical. If stores accept both at the same value, which one do you spend first? The cheaper one, of course. And what happens to the gold coin? You keep it. Multiply this behavior across society, and suddenly only bad money is circulating, while good money disappears. This is Gresham's law. Bad money drives good money out of circulation. Historically, when governments introduced coins made of cheaper metals while keeping the old, valuable ones in circulation, people hoarded the precious ones and spent the inferior ones. Over time, the entire system was flooded with low-quality money. This concept extends far beyond currency. In business, low-quality products can take over the market because they are cheaper or more aggressively marketed. In media, clickbait and sensationalism tend to push out well-researched journalism. On social media, misinformation spreads faster than truth because it's more entertaining. The key takeaway: quality doesn't always win. What's easier, cheaper, or louder often does. But if you want to build something lasting, fight against Gresham's law. Make quality your competitive edge, even when the world seems to reward mediocrity. Engel's law: the more you earn, the less you spend on food. Think about your monthly budget. If you earn very little, most of your money likely goes toward basic necessities: rent, food, transportation. But as your income increases, something interesting happens. The percentage of your budget spent on food decreases, even if you're buying more expensive meals. This is Engel's law. As income rises, the proportion of money spent on food decreases. The law isn't saying rich people eat less, it's saying food spending becomes a smaller part of their overall expenses. A low-income family might spend 50% of their money on food, while a high-income family might only spend 10%, even if they dine at fancy restaurants. This principle explains global economic shifts. As nations become wealthier, food becomes a smaller part of their economy, and spending shifts toward technology, entertainment, and services. That's why developed countries have booming luxury markets, while developing ones focus on basics, goods. Understanding Engel's law is key for businesses and policymakers. If you want to predict where consumer money is flowing, follow this rule. As people get richer, they move beyond survival and start seeking experiences, convenience, and status. Eroom's law, the reverse of Moore's law. Everyone knows Moore's law, the idea that computing power doubles every 2 years while costs drop. But what if the opposite was happening in another industry? Welcome to Eroom's law. Yes, that's Moore spelled backward. The cost of drug development doubles approximately every 9 years. In the pharmaceutical industry, discovering new drugs is becoming slower and more expensive over time, not faster and cheaper. Why? Because as science advances, regulations tighten, and the easy-to-find cures have already been discovered. The low-hanging fruit is gone, leaving only the most complex and expensive problems. This law applies to many fields. In construction, major infrastructure projects take longer and cost more than they did decades ago due to bureaucracy, environmental concerns, and rising labor costs. In education, universities are charging more money but not necessarily improving learning outcomes. The takeaway? Not everything follows the rapid acceleration of technology. Some industries are slowing down due to increasing complexity. If you're working in such a field, the key is to find ways to break the pattern, whether through innovation, policy reform, or alternative solutions. Little's Law. The math of waiting in line. You walk into a coffee shop, and there are 10 people in line. You estimate it'll take 5 minutes per person, so you prepare to wait 50 minutes. But instead, the line moves quickly, and you get your coffee in 20 minutes. What happened? You just experienced Little's Law. The average number of customers in a system equals the arrival rate multiplied by the average time spent in the system. This law applies to everything from grocery store lines to hospital emergency rooms. It explains why adding more checkout lanes reduces wait times, why traffic congestion gets worse when entry rates exceed exit rates, and why airports always seem to have long security lines. Businesses use Little's Law to optimize workflows. Restaurants calculate table turnover rates, airlines design boarding procedures, and software engineers analyze server loads. For everyday life, this law helps you predict and avoid delays. If a cafe is serving people faster than they arrive, the line will shrink. If a highway has more cars entering than exiting, expect a traffic jam. Understanding Little's Law means you'll never look at a waiting line the same way again, and you'll know exactly when to skip it. Wirth's Law. Software gets slower. Faster than hardware gets faster. You just bought a brand new laptop. It's lightning fast. For a while. Then, over time, it starts to slow down. Is the hardware getting worse? No. The software is getting heavier. This is Wirth's Law. Software gets slower faster than hardware gets faster. Computers today are vastly more powerful than those from 20 years ago, yet modern apps feel sluggish compared to old ones. Why? Because developers keep adding new features, layers of complexity, and unnecessary bloated code. The more powerful hardware gets, the more inefficient software becomes. Think about Microsoft Word in the 90s. It ran smoothly on weak machines. Today, it requires a high-performance laptop just to type a simple document. Websites used to be small and lightweight. Now, they load unnecessary animations, tracking scripts, and high-resolution images that slow them down. Wirth's Law is a warning to programmers and designers. Just because you can add more complexity doesn't mean you should. Simple, efficient software will always outperform bloated systems. For everyday users, it's a reminder that buying the latest gadget won't save you from slowdowns forever. The real solution: optimize software, not just hardware. Tesler's Law. The conservation of complexity. Have you ever used a piece of software that felt too simple, almost magical in how smoothly it worked? Think about Google's search engine. You type a few words, hit enter, and get instant results. But behind that clean, simple design lies an incredibly complex system processing billions of web pages in milliseconds. This is Tesler's Law, also known as the Law of Conservation of Complexity. Every system has an inherent amount of complexity. You can't eliminate it, only shift it elsewhere. When designers make a product easier for the user, they aren't making the system simpler. They're just transferring that complexity to the back end. The reason you don't see the chaos behind Google Search is that all the complexity is handled by Google's engineers, not by you. Think about the iPhone. Apple made it so intuitive that even a toddler can use it. But that simplicity comes at a cost. Apple's engineers had to do enormous amounts of work behind the scenes to hide the complexity from the user. On the other hand, if a system makes the user do all the work, like old software that required command-line inputs, it's because the complexity wasn't hidden. It was dumped onto the user instead. This law applies outside of technology too. In a restaurant, the more convenient your experience, menus, waiters, seamless service, the more complexity is handled behind the scenes by chefs, staff, and logistics teams. In business, the easier a service feels to customers, the more effort has gone into optimizing workflows, automation, and management. Understanding Tesler's law helps you appreciate why some things seem effortless. Someone, somewhere, is handling that complexity for you. And if you ever design a product or service, remember, the best experiences are the ones where complexity is managed so well that the user doesn't even notice it exists. Lucas Critique. Why economic models fail when policies. Change. Imagine you're a government economist trying to reduce unemployment. You look at past data and find that whenever the government increases spending, unemployment drops. So you suggest a massive new spending program. But when it's implemented, unemployment doesn't go down as expected. What went wrong? This is the Lucas critique. Economic models based on past data become unreliable when policies change. The problem is that people don't just passively follow past trends. They react to new policies. When governments increase spending, businesses and workers adjust their behavior. If people expect inflation, they demand higher wages. If companies expect higher taxes, they reduce investment. The entire system shifts in ways the original model never predicted. This law is why so many government policies have unintended consequences. It's why cutting taxes doesn't always boost economic growth, why rent control can lead to housing shortages, and why increasing the minimum wage doesn't always reduce poverty the way models predict. The Lucas critique teaches us that humans aren't robots. They adapt, they anticipate, and they change their strategies when policies shift. That's why policymakers and even business leaders must be careful when relying on historical data. Past trends don't always predict future results because people are always adjusting to new realities. Laffer Curve. Why higher taxes can reduce. Tax revenue. At first glance, raising taxes seems like a simple way for governments to collect more money. But what if higher taxes actually result in less revenue? This paradox is explained by the Laffer Curve. When tax rates get too high, people change their behavior in ways that reduce overall tax revenue. Think about it. If a country taxes income at 0%, the government collects no revenue. But if it taxes income at 100%, nobody would work because they wouldn't get to keep any money. Somewhere in between, there's a sweet spot where tax rates maximize revenue. This concept applies beyond taxation. In business, if a company raises prices too high, customers stop buying and profits drop. In personal productivity, if you push yourself too hard, burnout reduces your effectiveness. Governments and businesses that understand the Laffer curve can find the optimal point where they maximize results without pushing people to change their behavior negatively. And for individuals, it's a reminder that more effort doesn't always equal better results. Sometimes the key is balance. Rothbard's Law. Why government programs often achieve the opposite of their goals. Governments, at their core, are created to solve problems: poverty, healthcare, unemployment, housing shortages, education gaps. And in theory, this makes perfect sense. When society faces an issue too large or too complex for individuals or businesses to solve on their own, it's natural to look toward central institutions with power and resources. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Many government programs don't solve the problems they're designed to fix. In fact, sometimes they do the opposite. This brings us to Rothbard's Law. Government programs often end up accomplishing the opposite of their intended goals. At first glance, this may sound cynical, but it's not about demonizing government or assuming politicians are corrupt or incompetent. Instead, it's about recognizing a consistent pattern that emerges when large bureaucracies attempt to engineer outcomes in systems they can't fully control or predict. Take welfare programs. For example, designed with the noble intent of helping people escape poverty, they often provide financial assistance to those in need. But over time, in certain cases, these same programs create dependency, discouraging recipients from seeking full-time employment because doing so might reduce or eliminate their benefits. The system that was meant to uplift people can, unintentionally, trap them. Consider student loan subsidies. These were introduced to make higher education more accessible. But with guaranteed money flowing in, many universities raised their tuition prices, knowing students had government-backed loans to fall back on. The result? More debt, more expensive education, and, arguably, less value in the degrees being offered. Another example is rent control. It's designed to make housing affordable for tenants. But when landlords are restricted in how much they can charge, they may stop investing in maintenance or building new units altogether. Over time, this creates housing shortages, deteriorating properties, and a black market for apartments. All unintended consequences of a well-intentioned policy. So why does this happen? Because when governments intervene in complex systems, they often fail to account for the ripple effects. They tamper with incentives, and when you distort incentives, you distort behavior. And unlike engineering problems, where steel behaves, predictably under pressure, humans adapt, shift, and find ways around the rules. This doesn't mean all government intervention is doomed to fail, but it does mean that we should approach every new policy, program, or reform with a healthy dose of skepticism. Before supporting a solution, we need to ask a simple but powerful question. What could go wrong? Because good intentions aren't enough. Policies must be judged not by what they hope to achieve, but by what they actually produce in the real world. Incentives, not intentions, drive behavior. That's why smart solutions often focus on aligning individual interests with broader societal goals instead of trying to control outcomes from the top down. In the end, Rothbard's law is a reminder that the road to unintended consequences is often paved with the best of intentions. And if we want to build systems that truly help people, we must design them with both vision and humility. Sayre's law. Why supply creates its own demand. Imagine for a moment that you invent something the world has never seen before. Let's say it's a wearable device that lets people translate their thoughts into text in real time. No typing, no speaking, just pure mind-to-screen communication. At first, nobody is asking for it. There's no search volume, no social media buzz, no urgent demand screaming to be met. In fact, most people wouldn't even know such a thing was possible, or even needed. But then you launch it. People see what it can do. They realize how much time it saves, how it could help those with disabilities, how it revolutionizes communication. Suddenly, what no one was asking for becomes something millions of people want. And just like that, the demand is born, not before the product but because of it. This is the heart of Sayre's law. Supply creates its own demand. At first glance, it might sound counterintuitive. We're used to thinking that markets begin with demand, people wanting something, and businesses rushing in to meet that desire. But Jean-Baptiste Sayre, the French economist behind this principle, flipped the perspective. He argued that production itself is what enables demand. When someone produces a good or a service, they don't just create an item. They create value, which can then be exchanged for other goods and services. A baker doesn't just bake bread. She creates something that lets her trade with a carpenter, a teacher, or a tailor. By producing something, she becomes a consumer in the marketplace. Sayre's law highlights a powerful economic truth. We consume by producing. In a healthy economy, it's not just about how much people spend. It's about how much value they create. And when production rises, new opportunities, new industries, and yes, new demands follow. Think about the smartphone. Before the iPhone existed, People were content with flip phones and keyboards. Nobody was demanding a device with a glass touchscreen, app ecosystem, and facial recognition. But once Apple introduced it, it didn't just satisfy a market. It created a market. An entire universe of apps, accessories, services, and usage habits followed. Or consider the rise of electric cars. For decades, there was minimal demand. Then Tesla came along, not responding to a massive outcry for electric vehicles, but building something new, sleek, and desirable. And suddenly, demand exploded. This principle has massive implications for entrepreneurs, creators, and innovators. If you want to build something truly valuable, don't just ask, "What are people asking for today?" Ask instead, "What will they want tomorrow, once I show them it's possible?" The greatest companies in history, Apple, Amazon, Google, weren't just reactionary. They were visionary. They didn't chase demand, they anticipated it. Sometimes they created it from nothing. So whether you're launching a business, designing a product, or thinking about your next big idea, remember Sayre's law. Because in the end, true demand doesn't come from chasing trends. It comes from daring to create something worth wanting. The Veblen Effect. Why expensive products sell. More picture this. You walk into a sleek, high-end store lined with glass displays and soft jazz playing in the background. You're shopping for a watch. On the left, there's a beautifully designed piece priced at $100. Minimalist, functional, maybe even elegant. On the right, there's a similarly styled watch, but this one costs $10,000. Is it made of better materials? Perhaps. Does it keep time more accurately? Probably not. Both use quartz or automatic movements that do the job well. So why is one 100 times more expensive than the other? More importantly, why are you more tempted to buy the expensive? 1. Even if you didn't come in looking for a watch at all. This is the psychological power of the Veblen Effect. Some goods become more desirable as their price increases. Unlike most products, where lower price equals higher demand, Veblen goods work in reverse. They become more appealing specifically because they're expensive. The price tag doesn't scare people away, it attracts them. Why? Because in a world driven by perception, price equals prestige. That $10,000 watch doesn't just tell time, it tells a story. It says, "I can afford this." It signals wealth, taste, status, success. And in social psychology, signaling is everything. We see this everywhere. A $5,000 handbag might hold the same items as a $50 one, but the luxury version turns heads, sends messages, and elevates the owner's social standing. A luxury car might not get you to your destination any faster than a regular sedan, but its brand emblem carries unspoken weight. A hotel offering rooms for $100 per night may be clean and comfortable, but a $1,000 per night suite is seen as premium, even if the bed and towels feel the same. What's truly fascinating is how perceived value can override objective utility. The product itself might not change, but the way we feel about it does, simply because of the number on the tag. And that's what the Veblen Effect teaches us. Value is often created in the mind of the buyer, not in the function of the item. Many luxury brands understand this instinctively. They don't try to compete on practicality, they compete on desire. In fact, some intentionally keep their products expensive and limited, not to sell more, but to maintain status exclusivity. Lower the price, and the illusion of luxury evaporates. This principle also flips traditional business logic on its head. While most companies lower prices to attract buyers, some raise them to signal prestige. Think of high-end fashion houses, exotic cars, or even rare wines and art. The more expensive it is, the more people want it, because owning it means you're part of an elite group. But here's the deeper truth. The Veblen Effect isn't just about money. It's about identity. We don't always buy things because we need them. We buy things because of how they make us feel, and, more importantly, how they make others see us. So, what's the lesson here? In business, pricing isn't just a financial decision. It's a branding decision. How you price your product tells a story, sets expectations, and determines who will buy it. In life, it's a reminder to be conscious of your own desires. Ask yourself, do I want this because it's truly valuable, or because it's expensive? Because sometimes we're not paying for better quality. We're paying for the illusion of importance. And understanding that illusion gives you the power to choose more wisely. Kranzberg's first law. Technology is neither good nor bad, but it's never neutral. Imagine you're holding a smartphone in your hand, a device that gives you access to every book ever written, every map, every voice, every image. A tool that connects you to family, to news, to the world, anytime, anywhere. Sounds incredible, right? But then again, that same smartphone can be a portal to distraction, doom scrolling, addiction, misinformation, and surveillance. So, is it a miracle or a menace? Welcome to the paradox of modern innovation, perfectly captured by Kranzberg's first law. Technology is neither good nor bad, but it is never neutral. This simple sentence, coined by historian of technology Melvin Kranzberg, forces us to reconsider how we think about the tools that shape our lives. It tells us that no, technology, no matter how powerful or harmless it may seem, arrives in the world as a blank slate. Every innovation carries consequences, intended or not. Let's look at some examples. Nuclear energy is one of the most powerful technological achievements in human history. It can power entire cities with minimal emissions, providing an answer to climate change. But it can also wipe out entire cities in an instant, as Hiroshima and Nagasaki have taught us. Social media began as a way to stay connected, to share thoughts, to amplify voices. And it has done just that, bringing people together across cultures, enabling global movements like Knock Me Too and Black Lives Matter. But it has also deepened political divisions, accelerated the spread of fake news, and created a generation grappling with anxiety, self-worth, and digital addiction. Artificial intelligence is transforming healthcare, logistics, research, and creativity. It's helping diagnose diseases earlier, write code faster, and optimize everything from traffic to translation. Yet it also threatens to automate millions of jobs, amplify bias, and raise deeply ethical questions about autonomy and control. Kranzberg's insight was that technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. Its effects depend on context, culture, economics, and intent. A hammer can build a house or break a window. Fire can cook a meal or burn a forest. The same technology can liberate or oppress, depending on who holds the power and how it's applied. And it's not just the dramatic technologies that matter. Even seemingly minor innovations, like the printing press, have changed the course of civilization. It spread knowledge, yes, but also enabled propaganda and ideological wars. The automobile gave us freedom and speed, but also traffic, urban sprawl, and pollution. The light bulb extended the day but also disrupted natural sleep patterns. So, what does Kranzberg's law teach us practically? It teaches us that technological progress is not just a question of invention, it's a question of reflection. We must ask, who gains from this technology? Who loses? What values are embedded in its design? What does it encourage us to do or not do? This law reminds policymakers, engineers, designers, and users that their decisions ripple far beyond the screen, the chip, or the code. The ethical dimension is not optional. It's essential, and as we stand on the edge of even more disruptive waves, quantum computing, brain-machine interfaces, autonomous weapons, the importance of this idea grows louder. Technology doesn't simply exist. It acts, it changes us, and it always takes sides. The real question is, will we be thoughtful enough to choose what side it's on? Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Imagine standing in the middle of a quiet 19th century village. Horses clip-clop along cobblestone roads, gas lamps flicker in the evening fog, and letters are delivered by hand over weeks. Now picture yourself pulling out a modern smartphone in that world, just a black slab of glass, until it comes to life. With one touch, it glows and speaks. It shows moving images. It plays music from nowhere. It lets you talk to someone on the other side of the world, live. You ask it a question, and it answers. To the people around you in that time, you are not just an inventor or a traveler from the future. You are a sorcerer. That's the essence of Clarke's third law, coined by the visionary science fiction writer Sir Arthur C. Clarke. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. At its core, this law is a powerful reminder that what we consider impossible today may simply be something we do not yet understand. In fact, throughout history, progress has repeatedly turned magic into science. In ancient times, lightning was thought to be a weapon from the gods until we learned about electricity. The idea of flying was once pure fantasy until the Wright brothers took off at Kitty Hawk. Even the act of speaking to someone across great distances was considered supernatural, until the telephone, radio, and eventually the internet made it mundane. Look at the past 100 years alone. We've gone from candlelight to smart homes, from horse-drawn carts to electric vehicles and self-landing rockets. We've mapped the human genome, created machines that learn, and sent robots to other planets. What would someone from the 1800s think if they saw a drone flying overhead or a robotic dog opening doors? To them, we are technological wizards. But Clarke's law isn't just about looking backward, it's also a window into the future. Think about what's coming. Brain computer. Interfaces that let people type just by thinking. Quantum computers that could crack today's strongest encryption in seconds. Genetic editing tools that may allow us to prevent diseases before birth. Artificial intelligence that can compose symphonies, diagnose illness, or generate realistic, human conversation. If someone from 2024 stepped into our world today, they might pity our primitive devices, or they might be bound by technologies we can't yet comprehend. Because the distance between reality and imagination is shrinking. Every new breakthrough brings us closer to what once belonged only to science fiction. So, what does Clarke's law really teach us? It tells us to keep our minds open, to never dismiss something just because it sounds impossible. Every truly revolutionary invention starts as an idea that others laugh at. People once scoffed at electricity. They laughed at the internet. They said space travel was a fantasy. And yet, here we are, living in a world of satellites, algorithms, and answers in our pockets. So, the next time you hear someone say, "That'll never happen," remember Clarke's law. Because the truth is, the future always looks like magic until we finally build it. Stigler's law. No discovery is named. After its true discoverer, you've probably heard of Murphy's Law, that if anything can go wrong, it will. But what if I told you that Murphy himself didn't actually coin that phrase? Or take Pythagoras' theorem, one of the most widely known concepts in mathematics. Most people assume it was Pythagoras who first discovered that A2 plus B2 = C2 in right-angled triangles. But long before him, ancient Babylonian tablets already documented knowledge of this geometric relationship. And here's the ultimate irony. The very idea that no discovery is named after its true discoverer, that concept itself, is called Stigler's law. Yet, Stigler didn't discover it. He openly credited it to sociologist Robert K. Merton. No scientific discovery is named after its original discoverer. Stigler's law, it's a paradox, a playful wink at history, and yet it reveals a deeply rooted pattern in the way human knowledge spreads. We often remember the storyteller, not the originator. Throughout history, credit has been given not necessarily to the person who first had the idea, but to the person who popularized it, gave it a name, or happened to be in the right place at the right time. Let's look at some more examples. Hubble's law describes the expansion of the universe, but the idea was first proposed by Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian priest and physicist who published the theory 2 years before Edwin Hubble's more widely known paper. Newton's first law of motion, the idea that an object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon, was first articulated by Galileo, yet Newton is more commonly associated with it. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection was also being developed around the same time by Alfred Russel Wallace, whose contributions were crucial, but today Darwin's name dominates the story. Why does this happen? Partly because science isn't always fair, and partly because history tends to favor the louder voice, the better marketer, or the more influential figure. Sometimes the first discoverer publishes in obscurity or in a language that doesn't reach the scientific mainstream. Other times they simply lack the platform, the network, or the timing to make their discovery heard. It also reflects a deeper truth about how progress is rarely the work of one person alone. Scientific discovery is often incremental, built on layers of forgotten contributions, refinements, failed experiments, and quiet insights. The breakthrough moment we remember is usually the final visible spark on top of a much larger foundation, and so Stigler's law becomes both a caution and a comfort. If you're someone who creates, who discovers, who pushes the boundaries of knowledge, you might not get the recognition. Your name might never appear in textbooks, but the impact of your work may ripple through time anyway, under someone else's name, yes, but still changing the world. And in the end, isn't that what really matters? Miller's law, the limits of human memory. You're in a conversation, and someone rattles off their phone number. It's a quick stream of digits, no time to write it down. You repeat it to yourself once, twice, but by the third time, it's already slipping from your mind. Was it 764 or 746? 8 digits or 9? Why does this happen? It's not because you're forgetful or distracted. It's because your brain is working exactly as it was designed to. Welcome to Miller's Law, proposed in 1956 by cognitive psychologist George A. Miller. The average person can hold about 7 plus 2 pieces of information in their working memory at a time. This means that most people can manage somewhere between 5 and 9 individual bits of information at any given moment before their memory starts to fumble. And this simple limitation has shaped everything, from how we design phone numbers, to how we structure presentations, to how information is delivered in classrooms. Think about phone numbers. Originally, they were designed to be just 7 digits long, because studies showed that's the sweet spot for most people's short-term memory. Add an area code or country prefix, and suddenly we're in overload territory. That's why we now break numbers into chunks. What's 1? 415, 550132, 3 groups instead of 1 long string. Your brain can handle it more easily. But this limitation isn't a flaw. In fact, it's one of the brain's most powerful filters. Imagine if your mind tried to process everything it saw, heard, or thought in a given moment. You'd be overwhelmed in seconds. Miller's law ensures your attention stays focused. It filters the noise so your brain can prioritize what's important. Here's the fascinating part. While your working memory may be limited, your pattern recognition abilities are nearly limitless. You may not remember a string of 20 numbers, but you can remember a melody made of those numbers in musical form. You may forget a list of disconnected facts, but you'll recall a story that weaves those facts together. You might struggle to recall 12 random letters, but if they spell out imagination, your brain recognizes it instantly. That's where the concept of chunking comes in. Chunking is the process of grouping information into meaningful clusters. It's the reason we remember FBI, CIA, NSA better than FBCIANSA. It's why complex topics become digestible when they're broken into 3 main ideas or 5 simple steps. In education, chunking transforms dense textbooks into chapters, summaries, and flashcards. In business, it turns overwhelming data into key takeaways. In communication, it helps speakers deliver powerful messages by organizing their thoughts into compact, memorable phrases. So, how can you apply Miller's Law in real life? If you're teaching, break your content into bite-sized chunks. If you're presenting, organize ideas around 3 to 5 points. If you're learning, group related items together instead of trying to memorize them individually. And if you're trying to persuade, keep your message tight, because too much information leads to confusion, not conviction. Because the truth is, our minds aren't made to carry everything. We're made to carry just enough. And when we organize our thoughts in alignment with how our brains naturally work, information becomes not just easier to remember, it becomes impossible to forget. Gall's Law. Why complex systems must start emotion. Have you ever watched a grand project crash and burn, not because the idea was bad, but because it tried to be everything at once? Maybe it was a new government healthcare portal, launched, with a multi-billion-dollar budget and hundreds of features, only to freeze on day 1. Or perhaps it was a startup that promised to disrupt 10 industries simultaneously, but couldn't even get a minimum viable product out the door. It's a painful but familiar story, and it's exactly what Gall's Law warns us about. A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked. Coined by systems theorist John Gall, this law explains something crucial. You cannot build a complex, functional system from scratch. You have to start simple. Let it run. Let it fail. Let it evolve. And then, piece by piece, complexity can emerge. Let's start with something massive. The Internet. Today, it's the nervous system of the planet, a vast, interconnected web of devices, platforms, and protocols. But it didn't start that way. It began as ARPANET, a humble project connecting 4 university computers in 1969. No social media, no search engines, no video calls, just simple, basic communication. But because it worked, others could build on top of it. Email protocols, file transfers, the web, streaming, social networking, layer after layer, each tested, improved, and scaled. Or take Facebook. Today, it's a global empire with billions of users, an advertising machine, a marketplace, a video hub, a messaging platform. But back in 2004, it was just the Facebook, a bare-bones directory for Harvard students to look up their classmates. No mobile app, no global ambitions, just a simple idea that worked. And because it worked, it grew naturally into something more complex. Gall's Law explains why so many government systems fail spectacularly. Bureaucracies often try to roll out all-encompassing programs fully formed, huge databases, complex interfaces, one-size-fits-all solutions. But without a working foundation, the whole thing collapses under its own weight. The result? Wasted resources, frustrated users, and expensive lessons in humility. The same law applies to businesses, software, education models, and even personal goals. When you try to do everything at once, launch the app, build the brand, go viral, monetize, scale, it's easy to miss the most important step. Does it even work in its simplest form? Because here's the truth, complexity isn't the goal. It's a consequence, and whether that consequence is good or bad depends on how it was built. So, what's the lesson? Start small. Test early. Let it evolve. Create a system that works on a tiny scale before expanding it. If it works for 5 people, maybe it can work for 50. If it works for 1 city, maybe it can work for 10. If your app solves a simple problem, well, then you can add features. Evolution beats revolution, not just in biology but in design, business, and innovation. The best systems in the world weren't born complex. They became complex over time, through trial, error, and constant refinement. So the next time you're building something, an idea, a product, a company, remember Gall's law. If you want it to last, don't start big. Start smart, start simple, and let it grow. Brooks' Law. Why adding more people to a late project makes it later. Imagine this. You're managing a large software project. Deadlines are approaching, milestones are slipping, and tension is rising. The team is overworked, exhausted, and behind schedule. In a moment of urgency, a decision is made. Hire more developers. Surely, more hands on deck will speed things up, right? But instead of finishing faster, something strange happens. Progress slows down even more. Deadlines slip further. Bugs multiply. Meetings increase. Confusion spreads. How is it possible that more people made the project slower? This is the strange and counterintuitive truth captured by Brooks' Law. Adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. Coined by Fred Brooks, author of the classic software engineering book The Mythical Man Month, this law is more than just a clever quote. It's a reality that continues to surprise project managers, CEOs, and startup founders decades later. So, why does this happen? Let's break it down. When you bring new people onto an existing project, especially one that's already behind, those new team members don't magically become productive overnight. They need time to understand the code base, the structure, the logic, the tools being used. They need to learn about internal processes, team dynamics, goals, and decisions that were made months ago. In other words, they need to be onboarded. And who does the onboarding? The very same senior developers and team members who were already working overtime trying to meet deadlines. Now, instead of writing code or solving problems, they're holding hands, explaining architecture, reviewing, pull requests, and answering questions. It gets worse. As more people join the project, communication overhead skyrockets. Every new person introduces more complexity, more meetings, more Slack messages, more miscommunication, and more opportunity for errors. Collaboration, which once flowed naturally in a small team, now becomes an organizational chore. Brooks explained that projects don't scale linearly with headcount. In fact, beyond a certain point, adding people actually creates diminishing returns, and eventually, negative returns. And this principle doesn't apply only to software. In group projects at school, adding more people often leads to more confusion, less accountability, and overlapping work. In large corporate initiatives, expanding teams mid-project introduces new departments, new reporting lines, and more bureaucracy. In any setting, when you increase headcount without reducing complexity, you don't speed things up, you slow them down. So, what's the right way to handle a late project? The answer isn't more people, it's better clarity. Identify the real bottlenecks. Is it poor code structure? Is it unclear requirements? Simplify the workload. What features or tasks can be trimmed or delayed? Improve communication. Can updates be clearer, decisions faster, meetings fewer? Prioritize quality over quantity. Because a smaller, focused team that communicates well can often outperform a larger team that's struggling to stay aligned. Brooks' Law is ultimately a warning. Throwing bodies at a problem isn't management. It's panic. Instead of scaling chaos, scale focus. And if your project is behind, remember, speed doesn't come from numbers. It comes from clarity, coordination, and cutting through the noise. Conway's Law. Your organization shapes what you build. Imagine two very different companies are given the same task. Build a messaging app. One company is a traditional corporate behemoth with multiple departments, rigid hierarchies, and long approval chains. The other is a small startup with a flat structure, fast decision-making, and open lines of communication. Now, even if both teams have access to the same budget, tools, and timeline, their products will not feel the same. One will likely be sleek, fast, and intuitive. The other, probably clunky, fragmented, and full of unnecessary layers. Why? Because of Conway's Law, an observation made by computer programmer Melvin Conway in 1967. Any system designed by an organization will reflect the communication structure of that organization. In simpler terms, you ship your org chart. If a company is divided into silos, back-end team, front-end team, security team, mobile team, the product they produce will mirror those divisions. Even if users don't need separate experiences, the system will end up having clear borders where team responsibilities begin and end. Let's say the mobile team doesn't talk much to the API team. The app might end up feeling inconsistent or even broken, not because the teams are bad at their jobs, but because the communication pathways inside the company dictated the structure of the final product. A classic real-world example: government websites. Designed by sprawling bureaucracies, they often mirror the fragmented departments they come from. You try to apply for a permit, but end up bouncing between separate portals, each with its own login, interface, and form design. It's not just frustrating. It's Conway's Law in action, and it goes deeper. Even beyond tech, this law helps explain why corporate processes are often confusing, because the organization itself is confused. Why some customer experiences feel seamless, while others feel like a scavenger hunt, because internal misalignment bleeds outward. Why startups often outperform giants in user experience, because small teams communicate faster and build with a shared vision. So, what can we learn from this? The answer isn't just in writing better code or using better tools, it's in redesigning the team itself. If you want to build clean, cohesive products, start by creating clean, cohesive teams. Simplify your hierarchy. Flatten where possible. Break silos. Foster cross-functional collaboration. Align incentives. Ensure teams share the same goals, not conflicting ones. Improve internal communication, because the way your team talks determines the way your product feels. Conway's Law is a mirror. It reflects who you are as an organization. You can't fake clarity or alignment. If your team is disjointed, your users will feel it. If your culture is chaotic, your product will be too. So the next time you use an app that feels just right, smooth, and intuitive, remember, it didn't happen by accident. It's probably the result of a team that was just as aligned as the software they built. Because in the end, you don't just build products, you build extensions of your team. Zeigarnik Effect. Why unfinished tasks haunt your brain. You're lying in bed. The lights are off, your body is tired, and sleep should be just around the corner, but your brain didn't get the memo. It's racing through to-do lists, replaying a half-written email, reminding you that you never called your friend back and, oh no, you forgot to respond to that message from this morning. It's frustrating, isn't it? You're physically still, but mentally wide awake, trapped in a loop of lingering, unresolved tasks. This mental tug-of-war has a name: the Zeigarnik Effect. People remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones. Discovered in the 1920s. By Russian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, the effect first came to light in the unlikeliest of places: a cafe. Zeigarnik noticed that waiters had astonishing memory for orders that hadn't yet been paid. But once the check was settled, those same waiters immediately forgot the details. Intrigued, she ran a series of lab experiments and confirmed something we all experience intuitively. The human brain has a tendency to hold on to incomplete tasks, treating them as open loops that demand attention until they're resolved. Why does this happen? Because your brain is wired for closure. It doesn't like loose ends. When a task is incomplete, it creates a kind of mental itch, a cognitive tension that keeps nudging you until you either finish it or address it in some way. It's an ancient survival mechanism designed to help us follow through on goals, but in the modern world of never-ending notifications and multitasking, it can backfire, leaving us stressed, scattered, and unable to relax. This is also why cliffhangers work so well in movies and TV shows. That final scene cuts off mid-crisis, and your brain can't stop thinking about what's next. It creates emotional tension, and unless you resolve it by watching the next episode, your mind stays hooked. It's why incomplete puzzles, unfinished emails, or even half-packed suitcases bother us more than we expect. The open loop sits in the background, demanding attention. But here's the good news. You don't always have to finish a task to quiet your mind. Research shows that even writing down an unfinished task can give the brain a sense of control and closure. It's not about completion. It's about externalization. When you move a task from your mind to a notebook, a digital list, or a whiteboard, your brain gets the message. This is taken care of. I won't forget. The loop doesn't have to stay open. So if your mind feels overwhelmed, try a technique known as a brain dump. Take a blank page and write down every lingering thought, responsibility, or unfinished obligation. Don't edit. Don't prioritize, just get it out. The act alone can bring instant mental relief. Here's what the Zeigarnik Effect ultimately teaches us. Productivity isn't just about what you finish. It's about how well you manage what's unfinished. Because sometimes, peace of mind doesn't come from doing it all. It comes from simply knowing what needs to be done and that it's safely stored outside your head. The Doppler Effect. Why sounds shift. As they move, you're standing on the sidewalk when suddenly in the distance you hear a siren. It's high-pitched, sharp, cutting through the air. The ambulance approaches quickly. But then something strange happens. As it passes you and continues down the street, the pitch of the siren drops. It's still the same siren, the same vehicle, but the sound has changed. Why? This isn't an illusion. It's a well-documented and powerful phenomenon known as the Doppler Effect. The frequency of a wave changes based on the movement of its source relative to the observer. First described by Austrian physicist Christian Doppler in 1842, the Doppler effect explains how motion affects waves, most commonly sound waves. When a source of sound moves toward you, its waves compress. As a result, the frequency increases, and the pitch sounds higher. When it moves away, those waves stretch out, decreasing the frequency, and the pitch drops. It's not the siren that changes. It's your perspective of the sound that shifts. We encounter this every day without even realizing it. Race cars, roaring down a track scream as they approach and growl as they pull away. Trains sound different as they come into the station versus when they leave. Even the hum of an airplane overhead shifts as it moves past you. But the Doppler effect isn't just an interesting acoustic trick. It's one of the most important principles in science, with applications that stretch far beyond the sounds we hear. In astronomy, the Doppler effect helps us understand the structure and motion of the universe itself. When light from distant stars and galaxies is analyzed, scientists observe that the light often appears redder than expected. This phenomenon, known as redshift, happens because the light waves are being stretched as the galaxies move away from us. It's one of the key pieces of evidence that led scientists to conclude the universe is expanding, a foundational idea behind the Big Bang theory. In medicine, the Doppler effect is used in ultrasound imaging to measure blood flow. By observing the change in frequency of sound waves bouncing off moving red blood cells, doctors can assess the health of the heart, detect blockages, and monitor fetal development in pregnant women. In meteorology, weather radar systems rely on the Doppler effect to track storms. By detecting shifts in the frequency of radio waves bouncing off raindrops or snowflakes, meteorologists can measure wind speed and direction, allowing them to issue accurate and timely warnings for severe weather events. Even police radar guns use this principle to catch speeding vehicles. The gun emits a radio wave, which reflects off a moving car. The change in frequency of the return signal reveals the vehicle's speed, thanks again to the Doppler effect. All of this, astronomy, medicine, law enforcement, weather forecasting, from a simple shift in sound as something moves past you, and that's the beauty of science. Sometimes a small, everyday observation, like the pitch of a passing siren, can lead to insights that reshape our understanding of the entire cosmos. So the next time you hear that high-to-low pitch shift, don't brush it off as ordinary. You're not just hearing a vehicle pass. You're witnessing one of the most universal and far-reaching principles in nature, the Doppler effect in action. Peltzman Effect. Why safety measures can make us take more risks. Imagine two drivers. The first is behind the wheel of an old, rusty car. No airbags, no seatbelts, no traction control. The second is driving a brand-new vehicle equipped with the latest safety tech. Automatic emergency braking, lane departure warnings, adaptive cruise control, airbags on every side. Now, here's the question. Who drives more carefully? You might assume the first driver is in danger, and that the second is virtually invincible. But studies suggest the opposite. The driver in the older, fragile car is likely more cautious. Every decision matters. A mistake could be fatal. The driver in the safer car, they might drive faster, follow more closely, and take more chances. Why? Because of the Peltzman Effect, named after economist Sam Peltzman, who first described this counterintuitive principle in the 1970s. The safer people feel, the more risks they take. It's not that safety measures are useless. In fact, they save lives. But Peltzman showed that when people perceive lower risk, they often change their behavior in ways that can offset the benefit of those safety measures. Take the seatbelt. For example, when seatbelt laws were first introduced, researchers expected a sharp decline in traffic fatalities. What they found was surprising. While deaths among drivers went down, injuries and fatalities among pedestrians and cyclists went up. Drivers felt more protected and began driving more aggressively. In trying to protect themselves, they inadvertently endangered others. The same pattern shows up everywhere. In sports, athletes wearing helmets and pads may play more recklessly, feeling shielded from injury. In finance, companies with government-backed insurance may take riskier investments, assuming they'll be bailed out if things go wrong. In cybersecurity, businesses may install high-end protection software, then neglect basic practices like regular updates or employee training. In healthcare, people might take unnecessary risks after getting vaccinated, not because the vaccine failed, but because their behavior changed. The Peltzman Effect reminds us that perception drives behavior. It's not just the presence of safety, features that matters. It's how people respond to them. When we feel invincible, we tend to act as though we are, and that can create a new kind of danger. But this doesn't mean we should abandon safety measures. Airbags, helmets, vaccines, and encryption protocols do save lives and protect systems. The key is to understand that no safety system exists in a vacuum. Human behavior is part of the equation. So how do we design better systems? Combine protections with education. Don't just install safety tools, teach people how to use them responsibly. Introduce safeguards with accountability. Seatbelts matter, but so do speed limits and enforcement. Balance reassurance with realism. Make Sure, people understand that no system is perfect and no protection is absolute. The Peltzman Effect doesn't say that safety measures are bad. It says they're incomplete if we ignore the psychology of risk, because sometimes the illusion of safety can be more dangerous than the absence of it. So the next time someone tells you a system is completely secure, or that a new feature guarantees protection, pause and ask, how might this change the way people behave? Because in the end, true safety isn't just about the tools we create, it's about the choices we make when we feel protected. The Cobra Effect. When a solution makes the problem worse. It began with good intentions. During British colonial rule in India, officials faced a growing problem in Delhi: too many cobras. These venomous snakes posed a threat to public safety, and the colonial administration was under pressure to act. The solution they devised seemed clever and straightforward: pay a bounty for every dead cobra brought in. At first, the plan worked. People started killing cobras and collecting rewards. The number of snakes brought in rose quickly, and the government felt they had struck gold: policy in action. But then the unexpected happened. Entrepreneurs emerged. People began breeding cobras at home. Why go hunting when you can raise a snake, kill it, and cash in? The bounty program had created a perverse incentive. When the authorities finally caught on and canceled the program, the breeders were left with a problem. They had dozens, sometimes hundreds of cobras, with no use for them. So they did what anyone trying to cut their losses might do. They set the snakes free, and just like that, the cobra population surged, worse than before. A well-intentioned policy had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly. This phenomenon is now known as the Cobra Effect. A well-intended solution can make the problem worse, and it's not confined to history books. The Cobra Effect is everywhere, in governments, corporations, education systems, even in our personal lives. Consider these examples. A city introduces rent control to make housing more affordable. But landlords, unable to charge market rates, stop building new housing or maintaining old ones. The result? Fewer units, lower quality, and long-term housing shortages. A company bans smoking on the premises to promote health, but employees begin taking longer off-site breaks in more dangerous areas, or increase their smoking to compensate. Now, productivity drops and safety risks rise. A government subsidizes the production of corn to stabilize food prices. But farmers, following the money, overproduce it. The market becomes saturated, small farms collapse, and ecosystems suffer due to monoculture farming. Each of these scenarios shares a pattern. A solution aimed at solving a problem changes the incentive structure. And once incentives change, people adapt, often in ways the policymakers didn't predict or control. That's what makes the Cobra Effect so dangerous. It isn't about bad intentions, it's about unintended consequences. So, what's the lesson? Before implementing any rule, incentive, or policy, ask one crucial question: how might people exploit this? Because if there's a loophole, someone will find it. Not because they're bad actors, but because people respond to incentives. They act in their own self-interest. And systems that ignore that reality are doomed to collapse under the weight of their own logic. The Cobra Effect teaches us to think deeper. Solutions must be tested not just for effectiveness, but for manipulability. A truly smart policy anticipates human behavior, not just on paper, but in real life. Because in the end, the road to disaster is often paved with good intentions and a few too many cobras. Yerkes-Dodson Law. Why too much stress kills. Performance: you have a big exam coming up. The clock is ticking and you feel a little pressure rising, so you start studying, focused, alert, maybe even excited. That small sense of urgency is fueling your performance. But then, the night before the test, panic hits. Your heart races. You can't sleep. You reread the same paragraph 5 times and retain nothing. That helpful pressure? It's turned into paralyzing anxiety. You've crossed an invisible line. This invisible tipping point is captured by the Yerkes-Dodson Law, first described by psychologists Robert Yerkes and John Dodson in 1908. Performance increases with physiological or mental arousal, but only up to a point. After that, performance begins to decline. Think of it as an inverted U-shaped curve. On the left side of the curve is low stress, boredom, apathy, no motivation. In the middle is the sweet spot, moderate stress that sharpens your focus, boosts energy, and enhances performance. On the right side is too much stress, where anxiety, overwhelm, and mental fatigue cause your performance to collapse. This isn't just theory. It plays out everywhere. A professional athlete needs adrenaline to perform at their peak, but if the crowd, the pressure, or the stakes become too overwhelming, they may choke at the worst possible moment. A public speaker may deliver a passionate, engaging talk with just the right nerves, but if the anxiety takes over, their voice shakes, their thoughts scatter, and the message falls apart. An employee working under a tight deadline might feel focused and productive, until back-to-back deadlines, meetings, and constant pressure push them into burnout. That's the dark side of this law: chronic stress. We often assume more work equals more productivity. More pressure means better results. But the Yerkes-Dodson curve warns us, pushing too hard for too long will backfire. Your brain isn't a machine that works better the more you turn the dial. It's an organic system that thrives in balance. So, what can we learn from this? The secret isn't in avoiding stress. Some stress is actually essential. It keeps us sharp, goal-driven, and responsive. The key is to stay in the optimal stress zone and to recognize when you're slipping off the peak. Here's how to stay balanced. Set realistic goals. Break big tasks into manageable steps. Take intentional breaks. Don't wait until burnout. Hits, build in recovery time. Know your warning signs. Trouble sleeping, irritability, brain fog. That's your brain asking for relief. Use rituals to reset. A walk, deep breathing, journaling, disconnecting from screens. Small resets protect long-term performance. Manage pressure, don't eliminate it. Learn to channel stress like a controlled fire, enough to light the way, not burn the house down. In the end, Yerkes-Dodson Law isn't about fearing pressure. It's about understanding its limits. Stress is a tool. It can drive you, sharpen you, and help you grow, but only if you know when to press forward and when to pause. Because peak performance doesn't live in the extremes. It lives in the balance between challenge and control. Newton's third law, every action, has an equal and opposite reaction. You push against a wall. It doesn't move, but your muscles strain, and you feel the resistance. That's because the wall is pushing back with the exact same amount of force. You jump off a small boat into a lake, and just before you hit the water, you notice the boat drifting in the opposite direction. You didn't mean to move it, but you did. A rocket ignites, blasting gas downward at incredible speed, and in response the rocket lifts off, soaring upward into the sky. These are not coincidences. They're the everyday expressions of one of the most fundamental principles in physics, Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. At its core, this law describes a perfect balance. No force exists in isolation. If one object applies a force to another, the second object pushes back with equal intensity in the opposite direction. Motion, impact, flight, none of these would be possible without this dynamic exchange. It's what allows birds to fly, swimmers to glide, cars to move forward. A car's tires push backward against the road. and the road pushes forward against the tires. This invisible handshake between objects is the foundation of all movement. But what's truly fascinating is how Newton's third law transcends physics. How it applies to life itself. Every time you make a bold decision, you're applying a force to the world around you. And just like in physics, the world pushes back. You set a big goal. Life answers with challenges. You pursue a dream. Obstacles appear. Doubt creeps in. Delays test your patience. You speak up for something important. Not everyone agrees. Some push back hard, but this resistance isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're in motion. Just like a rocket meeting atmospheric pressure, or a sprinter feeling the ground resist beneath their feet, it's the resistance that allows for progress. Newton's law also echoes in relationships and behavior. Ever notice how kindness tends to invite kindness in return? Negativity spreads when one person brings it into a room. A smile can disarm anger, or a harsh word can escalate conflict. Human interactions are reflections. People react to the energy you give them. What you project often returns to you, not always immediately, not always perfectly, but predictably. This law is a quiet reminder that your actions matter, and they don't go unanswered. In motion, in intention, in energy. So, what's the takeaway? If you're pushing toward a goal and feel resistance, don't stop. That resistance is the world's natural response to motion. It's not meant to stop you. It's the necessary counterforce that gives your push meaning, weight, direction. It's part of the process of momentum. And if you're seeking better relationships, more positivity, or deeper connection, start by offering it. Because what you put out there, sooner or later, comes right back to you. In the end, Newton wasn't just describing the physics of the universe. He was uncovering a law of cause and effect, of motion and mirror, that applies to everything we do. So keep pushing. Push wisely. Push with purpose, and trust that the universe will always respond in equal and opposite measure. Red Queen Hypothesis. Keep evolving or get left behind. Picture this. Two gazelles sprint across the savannah, lungs burning, muscles straining. A cheetah in full pursuit just meters behind. One gazelle is slightly faster, slightly more agile. That tiny evolutionary edge, maybe just a few milliseconds, means the difference between life and death. The slower gazelle doesn't survive, and so, over generations, the gazelles become faster. But so do the cheetahs. Only the swiftest predators catch their prey and survive to pass on their genes. Nature, it turns out, isn't about reaching a destination. It's a race that never ends. This is the essence of the Red Queen Hypothesis. You have to keep evolving just to stay in the same place. The name comes from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, where the Red Queen tells Alice, "It takes all the running you can do to stay in the same place." In biology, this describes the never-ending arms race between predators and prey, parasites and hosts, species and environment. If one evolves, the other must adapt or perish. There's no final form, no plateau. Standing still means falling behind. But the Red Queen Hypothesis doesn't just apply to animals in the wild. It applies to you, your career, your business, and even your personal growth. Look at the tech world. Nokia, once the undisputed king of mobile phones, failed to adapt to the rise of touchscreen smartphones. While they were celebrating market dominance, Apple and Android redefined the rules. Nokia couldn't keep up. Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix for pennies. They laughed it off. While they clung to old models, Netflix evolved, pivoted, and eventually buried them. Even Kodak, who invented the digital camera, refused to embrace it, fearful it would cannibalize their film business. That hesitation cost them everything. These aren't just stories of failure. They're examples of evolution denied. And it's not just about companies. It's about you. The skills that got you your last job may not get you your next one. The degree that opened doors a decade ago might now be considered outdated. The mindset that once helped you succeed might now be limiting your growth. In today's world, industries evolve overnight. New tools emerge weekly. AI, automation, climate change, remote work, all reshaping the landscape faster than ever before. You might be excellent at what you do today, but if you're not adapting for tomorrow, someone else is. So what's the solution? Keep running. Keep learning. Keep evolving. Even when you're ahead, act like you're behind. Even when things are working, ask, what's next? What can I do better? This doesn't mean constant exhaustion. It means intentional growth. Reading more, listening better, upgrading your tools, staying curious. It means treating stability not as a finish line, but as a platform for the next leap. Because in a world that never stops moving forward, motion is survival. So the next time you feel comfortable, safe, or on top, remember the Red Queen. The race isn't over. It never was. And if you want to stay in place, there's only one way. Run. Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon. Why you keep seeing the same thing. Everywhere have you ever learned a new word, something obscure, maybe even exotic, and then within hours you hear it again in a podcast, read it in a book, or see it flash across a social media post? Or maybe you decide you're interested in buying a red car. Suddenly, it feels like everyone else on the road is driving that exact red car. Did the universe shift to show you what you were thinking? Not quite. Welcome to the Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon, also known as frequency illusion. Once something enters your awareness, you start noticing it more often. The thing hasn't suddenly appeared more. It's been there all along. You just didn't notice it before. What's changed isn't the world. It's you. Here's how it works. Your brain is constantly bombarded with information. Millions of sights, sounds, ideas, and stimuli every single day. But if you tried to consciously process all of it, you'd burn out in minutes. So your brain develops a filter. It decides, often subconsciously, what's relevant and what gets tossed aside. But when something new becomes meaningful to you, a word, a car model, a concept, that filter shifts. Suddenly, your brain decides, this is important. Pay attention. And what once slipped past unnoticed is now highlighted every time it shows up, and it's not just words or objects. It happens with ideas, too. Let's say you decide to start focusing on your health. Out of nowhere, you begin noticing that your coworker is drinking a green smoothie every morning, that there are yoga flyers on the bulletin board at work, that Instagram suddenly seems full of people running marathons or meal prepping. Were those things always there? Yes, but now you're tuned in. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon isn't magic. It's a function of your brain's reticular activating system, RAS, the part responsible for attention and alertness. It's the same system that helps a mother instantly wake at the sound of her baby's cry, or that makes your ears perk up when someone across the room says your name. Now, here's the twist, and the power of this phenomenon. It works in both directions. If you constantly dwell on problems, your brain will serve them to you on a silver platter. You'll see obstacles, threats, and reasons to feel overwhelmed. But if you start focusing on solutions, opportunities, and growth, those are the patterns. Your brain will begin highlighting. Suddenly, possibilities show up where you never saw them before. That's why entrepreneurs start spotting business ideas in everyday frustrations. Why writers suddenly hear great dialogue in real-life conversations. Why people in love see romantic gestures in the smallest things. Your attention shapes your perception, and your perception shapes your reality. Marketers know this well, Search for a product once and suddenly you see it everywhere. Online, in stores, on billboards. It's not just tracking algorithms, it's your brain saying, "This is relevant now." So what's the takeaway? You can't control everything around you, but you can control what you focus on. If you want more creativity, pay attention to curiosity. If you want growth, start tuning into opportunity. If you want peace, begin noticing. Calm moments you used to overlook. Because your mind is always listening, and it will show you more of whatever you're looking for. So, the next time something starts showing up everywhere, ask yourself, is the world changing? Or am I? Just finally noticing it, and more importantly, what else am I not noticing yet? Occam's razor, the simplest explanation, is usually correct. It's late at night. You're lying in bed when you suddenly hear a thud downstairs. Your mind races. Is someone breaking in? Could it be a ghost? Maybe something fell off the shelf on its own? Or, more realistically, maybe your cat just knocked over a glass while exploring the kitchen counter. Chances are, you already know the answer. And that answer lies in one of the most enduring mental tools of logic and clarity. Occam's razor. Among competing explanations, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. Or, more simply, the simplest explanation is usually correct. This principle is named after William of Occam, a 14th century English philosopher who believed that we shouldn't multiply entities beyond necessity. In other words, don't make things more complicated than they need to be. Occam's razor isn't about denying complexity. It's about starting with simplicity. When multiple theories could explain something, the one that makes the fewest leaps in logic is more likely to be right. This principle is a guiding star in science, medicine, detective work, and even everyday life. A patient develops a cough and fever. Before jumping to the conclusion that it's a rare tropical disease, a doctor will likely first consider, could it just be the flu? Your Wi-Fi stops working. Do you assume the ISP is targeting you? Or do you check to see if the router is unplugged? A company loses market share. Is it corporate sabotage? Or is it more likely that their product quality declined and customer service slipped? Occam's razor helps cut through the noise. In a world filled with conspiracy theories, overanalysis, and information overload, it encourages us to begin with what's most likely, not what's most dramatic. Think about how this plays out in true crime investigations. Early on, police often focus on people close to the victim, not because of bias, but because statistically that's where the explanation often lies. It doesn't mean the more elaborate theories are impossible, but they usually require more. Evidence, Occam's razor, is also useful in relationships and communication. If a friend doesn't text you back, is it because they secretly hate you and are planning to cut you out of their life? Or did they just get busy and forget to respond? If your coworker looks upset, is it because they're mad at you? Or is it possible they're just having a bad day? Our brains love drama. We are wired to fill in blanks with stories, often adding unnecessary layers of meaning. But Occam's razor urges us to pause and ask, am I adding assumptions here? Because the more assumptions you need to make something make sense, the more fragile your explanation becomes. Now, a crucial point. Occam's razor is not about always being right. The simplest explanation isn't guaranteed to be true. It's just the best place to start. It's a tool for reasoning, not a law of the universe. Complex truths exist, but in the absence of strong evidence for a convoluted theory, start with what's most straightforward. So the next time you lose your keys, don't assume someone broke into your house and moved them out of spite. Check your jacket pocket first. When something goes wrong at work, look for a process failure before you start assigning malicious intent. Because in a world full of tangled webs and endless possibilities, Occam's razor is your mental scalpel. A way to trim away the clutter and get to the heart of the matter. Simple isn't just elegant. Sometimes it's exactly right. Dunning-Kruger Effect. The less you know, the more you think you know. You've likely encountered them. The guy at the gym loudly giving fitness advice to anyone within earshot, despite clearly lacking basic knowledge of form or anatomy. The friend who becomes a geopolitical strategist overnight after reading one viral article. The coworker confidently leading a project in a field they barely understand, brushing off the concerns of actual experts in the room. These aren't rare exceptions. They're textbook examples of the Dunning-Kruger Effect. People with low ability tend to overestimate their competence, while those with high ability often underestimate theirs. First described in 1999 by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, this cognitive bias reveals a fascinating paradox. The less you know about a topic, the more likely you are to believe you're an expert. And conversely, the more deeply you understand something, the more you realize how much you still don't know. Here's why it happens. When someone is new to a subject, whether it's cooking, coding, politics, or fitness, they often see the surface and assume it's the whole picture. They haven't yet encountered the nuances, exceptions, and complexities that experts wrestle with daily. So their confidence is artificially high, not because they've earned it, but because they're unaware of the depth they're missing. Meanwhile, experts have spent years, sometimes decades, diving into those same complexities. They've made mistakes, revised assumptions, and learned the painful truth. Real knowledge comes with uncertainty. That's why the best minds are often the most cautious. They speak carefully, qualify their statements, and say things like, "It depends," or "I could be wrong." This is the heart of the Dunning-Kruger curve. At the beginning, you know a little and feel like you know a lot. This is Mount Stupid. As you learn more, your confidence plummets. You realize how vast the subject truly is. With time, your knowledge and confidence grow together, but you're now more measured, more humble. In today's world, where information is cheap but wisdom is rare, the Dunning-Kruger effect is everywhere. Social media platforms give every user a megaphone, but not every voice is informed. Influencers give health advice without training. Pseudo-experts go viral while real scientists struggle to cut through the noise. This effect explains why overconfidence is so dangerous. People who are least qualified often speak the loudest. And in a world driven by speed and certainty, loudness gets rewarded, regardless of accuracy. So how do you avoid falling into this trap? Start with humility. If something seems simple, too simple, you probably haven't looked deeply enough. Ask more questions. Challenge your own assumptions. Seek feedback from people who know more than you. And when you gain knowledge, hold it lightly. True intelligence isn't about certainty. It's about being comfortable with what you don't know, and curious enough to keep exploring, because in the end, the smartest people aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones who know how much they still have to learn. The Tetris Effect. How repetition shapes your mind. You've just spent hours playing Tetris. You finally turn off the game, but something strange happens. When you close your eyes, you still see the blocks falling. As you walk through the grocery store, you begin mentally arranging cereal boxes to fit neatly on the shelves. You look at buildings, furniture, clouds, and your brain keeps trying to rotate and stack everything into place. This is more than just an after effect of gaming. It's a cognitive phenomenon known as the Tetris Effect. What you repeatedly do starts shaping how you think, even when you're not doing it. It was first noticed in the 1990s when researchers observed that players who spent long sessions playing Tetris would continue to see the falling blocks in their dreams, their peripheral vision, and even in their thought patterns throughout the day. The game had, quite literally, rewired their brains, temporarily tuning their mental filters to recognize patterns, gaps, and rotations in everything around them. But this effect isn't just about video games. In fact, it goes far deeper into how we learn, work, and live. Think about it. If you spend your day solving problems, your brain starts seeing everything as a problem to be solved, even things that don't need fixing. If you spend hours writing emails, your thoughts might start coming in bullet points and reply threads. If you scroll social media endlessly, you start thinking in memes, punchlines, and dopamine-driven bursts. If you practice gratitude daily, your mind starts scanning the world for things to be thankful for, automatically. This is the incredible power of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to adapt and rewire itself based on repetition and exposure. What you do frequently becomes what your brain gets better at noticing. You don't just form habits, you form mental lenses through which you begin to view the world. And that makes the Tetris Effect both a trap and a tool. If you fill your days with negativity, anxiety, or constant distractions, your mind will start to default to those modes of thinking. You'll be more prone to worry, comparison, or stress, not because life got harder, but because your brain got trained to see it. That way, but flip it around, and you unlock something powerful. Want to be more creative? Surround yourself with creative ideas. Sketch, write, listen to music. Soon, your brain will start connecting ideas on its own. Want to be more mindful? Spend a few minutes each day focusing on your breath or your surroundings. Your brain will start noticing details you used to miss. Want to be more disciplined? Repeat small acts of discipline. Over time, they won't feel like effort. They'll feel like normal. This effect explains why high performers in any field, athletes, musicians, entrepreneurs, practice the same things again and again. It's not just muscle memory they're building, it's mental alignment. Their focus isn't accidental, it's trained. So the next time you catch yourself stuck in a thought loop, ask, "What have I been feeding my mind lately?" Because your brain is always listening, always learning, always adapting, and in the end, you become what you do repeatedly, in action, in thought, in focus. Choose wisely. Stack your mental blocks with intention. Postel's Law. Be tolerant to others, but strict with yourself. You're writing an important email, maybe to a client, a boss, or a potential collaborator. You triple-check the spelling, carefully word each sentence, and make sure your tone is just right. Now imagine receiving an email from someone else. It has a small typo, maybe a missed comma, or a sentence that's a little awkward. Do you judge them harshly? Probably not. You know what they meant. That gap between how you treat others and how you hold yourself is exactly where Postel's Law comes into play. Be conservative in what you send, and liberal in what you accept. Or, put another way, be strict with your output and forgiving with others' input. Named after John Postel, a pioneer of Internet protocols, this law originated in computing. He believed that systems should communicate reliably even in the face of imperfections. If a web browser receives slightly malformed data, it shouldn't crash, it should gracefully handle the error. At the same time, when sending data, a program should follow the rules carefully to avoid causing problems for others. In short, be generous in interpretation and disciplined in expression. But what began as a guideline for machines is now recognized as a powerful principle for human interaction. Let's break it down. Imagine a well-designed website form. It asks for your birth date. You type January 3rd, 1995 instead of 1995-103. A smart system doesn't reject your input. It understands and adjusts. But internally, when storing the date, it converts it into a standardized format. That way, everything works smoothly behind the scenes. Flexibility in reception, discipline in execution. Now, apply that to everyday life. A great communicator listens generously. They don't interrupt over a poor word choice or a slightly off metaphor. But when it's their turn to speak, they aim to be clear, concise, and respectful. A respected leader forgives honest mistakes from their team, understanding that perfection isn't realistic. But they hold themselves to high standards, not because they expect applause, but because credibility is earned by consistency. A thoughtful friend or partner assumes good intent during misunderstandings, but works hard to express their own feelings with care and clarity. Postel's law helps prevent unnecessary conflict. In a world where people so often jump to conclusions, correct each other publicly, or assume offense where none was intended, this principle invites us to practice grace. When someone says something a bit clumsy, pause before reacting. Ask, what were they trying to say? Interpret with kindness. But when you're speaking or acting, don't assume others will give you the same benefit of the doubt. Choose your words intentionally. Speak with clarity. Respect the space you're stepping into. This dual mindset, rigorous self-awareness and generous interpretation of others, creates harmony in teams, trust in relationships, and respect in communities. It encourages a culture where people feel safe to express but also motivated to do their best. So the next time you're tempted to criticize someone over a minor misstep, consider, are you offering the kind of understanding you'd hope to receive? And when it's your turn to show up, will you meet the moment with the same care you expect from others? Because in the end, Postel's law isn't just about communication protocols or code, it's about becoming the kind of person who builds bridges instead of walls. Hawthorne Effect. People change when they know. They're being watched. A company wants to improve worker productivity. They launch a study to test whether brighter lighting in the factory boosts output. The results are promising. Productivity increases. Encouraged, they try something else. They dim the lights, and surprisingly, productivity increases again. Confused but intrigued, they continue tweaking the environment. Longer breaks, shorter breaks, rearranged equipment. Every single time, performance goes up. What's going on? This curious and counterintuitive pattern is now known as the Hawthorne Effect. People behave differently when they know they're being observed. The name comes from a series of experiments conducted at the Hawthorne Works factory in Illinois during the 1920s and 1930s. Researchers were trying to find the environmental conditions that best boosted output, but what they discovered was something far more interesting. It wasn't the changes themselves that mattered. It was the fact that workers knew they were being watched. The attention itself became the catalyst. When people are aware they're being observed, they tend to modify their behavior, not necessarily to deceive, but to rise to perceived expectations, to present the best version of themselves, or simply to feel like what they're doing matters. You see this everywhere. Drivers slow down when they see a police car, even if they were already close to the speed limit. Employees become more diligent when their boss is walking the floor or reviewing performance. Students pay closer attention in class when the teacher is actively engaged and circulating the room. Gym-goers push harder when they're being coached, or even just when someone's watching from across the room. Security cameras in public spaces reduce incidents. Not because people are caught in the act, but because the presence of being watched changes the act itself. The Hawthorne Effect shows us something profound about human nature. Accountability amplifies intention. We perform better when we believe our actions are seen, acknowledged, and valued. This is why coaches, mentors, and managers can have such a powerful impact, not just through their feedback, but simply through their presence. It's also why people stick to goals better with accountability partners, fitness trackers, or habit journals. The awareness creates momentum. But there's another side to this coin. Constant surveillance can backfire. When observation turns into suspicion, or when people feel they're being watched to catch mistakes rather than to support growth, the effect shifts. People begin to perform for the observer, not for the task. They become anxious, inauthentic, or disengaged. Productivity may rise temporarily, but trust erodes over time. So, what's the takeaway? Use the Hawthorne Effect intentionally, not manipulatively. Create systems of visible accountability, but pair them with psychological safety. Let people know their work matters, not because you're spying on them, but because you're with them. When people feel like they're seen, not just for what they produce, but for who they are, they don't just work harder. They work smarter, more creatively, and with genuine investment. So whether you're a leader, a teacher, a teammate, or simply someone striving to be your best, remember, presence shapes performance. And sometimes all it takes to improve is the simple knowledge that someone's paying attention. Peter Pan syndrome. The fear of growing up. We all remember Peter Pan, the boy who could fly, who battled pirates, and who swore he'd never grow up. It's a whimsical tale of magic and rebellion against the boring rules of adulthood. But outside of Neverland, when someone refuses to grow up, not in body but in mind and responsibility, the story becomes less enchanting. This is known as Peter Pan syndrome. Some people resist adulthood and the responsibilities that come with it. Coined by psychologist Dr. Dan Kiley, Peter Pan syndrome refers to adults, often men but not exclusively, who cling emotionally to adolescence, avoiding the responsibilities, decisions, and growth that come with maturity. They don't want to grow up, not because they're full of childlike wonder, but because they're afraid. Afraid of commitment, afraid of accountability, afraid of the discomfort that comes with growth. It's not about enjoying video games, loving cartoons, or staying playful. That's healthy youthfulness. Peter Pan syndrome goes deeper. It's when someone refuses to take ownership of their life. They avoid hard conversations. They jump from job to job, blaming bosses instead of improving. In relationships, they fear long-term commitment, sometimes ghosting partners when things get serious. They romanticize the past, but avoid building a future. You'll hear it in phrases like, "Adulting is too hard. I'm not ready to settle down. I just want to have fun." There's nothing wrong with wanting joy, but joy without growth eventually feels empty. And here's the deeper truth. Freedom doesn't come from avoiding responsibility. It comes from embracing it. Growing up doesn't mean surrendering your soul to a 9-to-5 or trading dreams for bills. It means owning your life. It means building something meaningful. When you gain financial independence, when you invest in real relationships, when you start shaping your own path, you stop floating and you start flying. Because real adventure, it's not in staying a child forever. It's in facing life head-on, with courage, with wisdom, with heart. And if you see signs of Peter Pan syndrome in yourself or someone you love, know this. It doesn't change overnight, but it can change, with small intentional steps. Learning to manage your money, committing to one small long-term goal, showing up when it's uncomfortable, taking ownership of mistakes, and growing from them. You don't have to give up your inner child. In fact, keep it close, but let your inner adult sit in the driver's seat. Because staying in Neverland might seem safe, but the real magic happens outside it. The world doesn't need more lost boys. It needs people who've found themselves and are brave enough to grow. Barbra Streisand Effect. Why trying to hide something makes it more popular. In 2003, legendary singer and actress Barbra Streisand took legal action to suppress an aerial photograph of her oceanfront Malibu home. The image had been quietly posted online as part of a public archive documenting coastal erosion. Before the lawsuit, the photo had been downloaded just 6 times, 2 of those by her own lawyers. But once the lawsuit became public, the result was, well, the exact opposite of what she intended. News outlets picked it up. Bloggers commented. Curious internet users began searching for the forbidden image. The photo spread across websites, forums, and social media. What began as a simple effort to protect privacy exploded into a global story. This moment became the birth of a now famous term, the Streisand Effect. Trying to suppress information only makes people more curious about it. And once that, curiosity is triggered, the Internet doesn't forget. It amplifies, it multiplies, it immortalizes. This phenomenon happens because of something deeply human. We're wired to be curious about what we're told we can't have. When something is labeled restricted, private, or censored, it instantly becomes more intriguing. It's why banned books often become bestsellers. Embarrassing tweets, once deleted, go viral through screenshots. Corporate scandals, when buried or denied, only grow stronger when the truth leaks. Authoritarian regimes, in trying to censor news, end up drawing even more international attention to it. The harder you try to erase something, the more people start asking why. And in the digital age, where screenshots, archives, and mirrors live forever, suppression efforts often do more damage than the original content ever could. But here's the deeper insight. The Streisand effect isn't just about information. It's about trust. When someone tries to hide something, it sends a signal. This is dangerous. This is damaging. You shouldn't look at this. And whether the intent was innocent or protective, the perception becomes one of guilt, secrecy, or dishonesty. That perception is what sparks virality. So, what's the lesson? Sometimes trying to control the narrative only loses you control. If a public figure makes a mistake, owning it early often neutralizes the impact. If a company faces a PR disaster, transparent communication beats legal threats and silence. If an embarrassing moment surfaces online, sometimes the smartest move is to laugh with it, not fight against it. In a world where every click can echo, discretion and humility often win over censorship and force. Because the moment you say, "Don't. Look at this," the whole world leans in and whispers, "Why not?" So before trying to delete, suppress, or erase something from public view, pause and ask, will this act draw more attention than the thing itself? Because as Streisand unintentionally taught us, trying to bury something may be the very thing that brings it to life. The Streetlight Effect. Why we look for answers in the wrong places. A drunk man is crawling on the sidewalk beneath a streetlight. A passerby notices him and asks, "What are you looking for?" "My keys," the man replies. "Did you lose them here?" "No," he says, "but this is where the light is." It's a funny story, until you realize it's not really about lost keys. It's about how all of us think. This is called the Streetlight Effect. People tend to search for answers where it's easiest to look, not necessarily where the real answers are. It's a bias born out of comfort, out of visibility. We gravitate toward the familiar, the measurable, the convenient, even if it leads us away from the truth. You see this in science all the time. Researchers often study what they can easily observe or quantify, not necessarily what's most important. It's easier to measure screen time than to measure emotional well-being. It's easier to test heart rate than to explore the deeper roots of anxiety or grief. But ease of access doesn't equal relevance. In medicine, a patient presents with common symptoms: fatigue, headaches, stomach pain. Doctors might treat what's statistically likely, a virus, a minor infection. But what if it's something rare, even life-threatening? Focusing only on what's well-lit may lead to misdiagnosis, not out of neglect but out of habit. In business, leaders often obsess over vanity metrics, likes, clicks, follower counts, because those are easy to track. They're visible, chartable, presentable in a meeting, but real growth comes from deeper, messier data: customer loyalty, employee morale, product quality, the areas where the light doesn't shine as easily. even in our personal lives. The Streetlight Effect shapes how we handle challenges. Feeling unfulfilled? It's easier to rearrange your schedule than to examine your purpose. Facing a relationship struggle. It's simpler to argue over chores than to confront emotional distance. Lost in your career? You might tweak your resume for the 100th interview. Time instead of asking the bigger question, is this the path I even want? The problem isn't that we're lazy. It's that we're human. We naturally seek answers where it feels safe to look. But the real breakthroughs, those transformative insights, often lie in the shadows, in the places we haven't examined yet. So, what can we do? Start by asking better questions. Am I focused on what's easy to fix or what actually needs fixing? What haven't I explored yet, and why? Am I searching under the streetlight or where I actually dropped the keys? True insight rarely lives where it's bright and obvious. It often hides in complexity, discomfort, and uncertainty, and it takes courage to step outside the familiar glow and search in the dark. But that's where the truth lives. That's where the growth is, and that's where the real answers wait for those willing to look for them. So the next time you're problem-solving, don't just ask, "Where's the light?" Ask, "Where's the truth?" Then go there, even if it means crawling into the shadows. Zeno's paradox. Why you can never truly reach the finish line. Imagine you're standing at the starting line of a 100-meter race. You hear the signal, your legs push off the ground, and you begin to run. But before you reach the finish line, you must first get halfway there, 50 meters. Then, to cover the remaining ground, you must run half of what's left, 25 meters, then 12.5, then 6.25, then 3.125, and so on. No matter how close you get, there's always another half left to go. If you keep dividing the distance in half, infinitely, you never actually reach the finish line. Welcome to Zeno's paradox, a philosophical puzzle proposed by ancient Greek thinker Zeno of Elea, more than 2,000 years ago. And yet it still challenges our understanding of motion, space, and the limits of logic. To reach a destination, you must always cross half the remaining distance, which means, theoretically, motion never ends. Of course, in real life, you do finish races. You cross thresholds. You shake hands at the end of marathons and fall, breathless across finish lines. So, what gives? Zeno's paradox doesn't break the laws of motion. It breaks the way we think about infinity. The problem lies not in physical space, but in the mathematics of division. Yes, you can divide a distance into infinite parts, but when you add them all together, they converge on a finite total. Mathematically, it's an elegant solution called a converging series. But where Zeno's paradox truly shines is not in its challenge to physics, but in its mirror of human experience. Because in life, we often set goals that feel exactly like Zeno's race. You want to learn a new language. At first, the progress is obvious. Hello, numbers, basic phrases. But then you realize fluency has layers. Grammar rules, exceptions, idioms, cultural nuance. You keep getting closer, but the finish line keeps moving further away. You start a business. You build the product, get the website up, make your first sale. But now there's marketing, customer retention, scaling, hiring, legal. The end keeps splitting into more steps. You begin a fitness journey. You lose weight, gain strength, hit your goals. But now you see what's still possible. A better routine, a healthier mindset, a new challenge. The truth is, every milestone reveals another milestone. Every arrival shows a new path you hadn't seen before. And like in Zeno's paradox, you can start to wonder, will I ever truly get there? But here's the secret. Progress doesn't depend on reaching the finish line. It depends on movement. You don't need to close the infinite gap. You only need to take the next step, and then the next, and the next. What feels infinite becomes manageable when you stop fixating on the horizon and start focusing on the ground beneath your feet. Zeno's paradox teaches us something deeper than math ever could. Success is not a destination, it's a direction. Growth is not a place, it's a path. You don't need to cross all infinity, you just need to keep going. So when your goals feel out of reach and progress seems to shrink the closer you get, remember, you're not stuck, you're just in motion. You're not failing, you're evolving, and every half step you take still brings you closer than before. Greenspun's law. Every large project contains an unintended programming language. You're deep in a massive software project. What started as a clean, simple code base has slowly morphed into something unrecognizable. Over time, developers added a custom configuration system, then a special set of rules to handle behavior, then a macro engine to define templates. And now, you realize, maybe with a mix of horror and amusement, you've basically built your own programming language inside your application. Congratulations! You've just proven Greenspun's law. Any sufficiently complex program will inevitably re-implement a poorly designed version of Lisp, first coined by Philip Greenspun, an MIT computer scientist and web pioneer. This law is both a technical insight and a tongue-in-cheek warning. It speaks to the tendency of large software systems to accidentally evolve into general-purpose languages, regardless of the original intent. Why Lisp? Because Lisp, short for list processing, was one of the earliest programming languages designed in the 1950s. It introduced concepts like recursion, macros, and symbolic expression handling that allowed for incredible flexibility. It was so abstract and powerful that you could write programs that write other programs. But with great power comes great complexity. Developers who avoid such languages at the outset often end up, bit by bit, rebuilding a version of them, usually with less clarity, less power, and far more bugs. They create domain-specific languages, DSLs, macro processors, templating engines, configuration parsers, all in the name of solving problems that real languages were already built to handle. But Greenspun's law isn't just about code, it's about systems. In business, you start with a flat structure. Over time, to handle edge cases and exceptions, you create internal protocols, approval chains, role-based rules, and suddenly, your startup operates with all the slowness of a 1970s government office. In government, you pass a simple policy. Then, new policies are layered on to clarify, protect, enforce, or fix the consequences of the last one. Before long, you're navigating a maze where each turn leads to another regulation that explains a regulation. Even in daily life, think about your personal productivity system. You started with a to-do list. Now you've got color-coded Notion, databases, synced calendars, recurring tags, and reminders on 3 platforms. You've built an entire workflow engine for yourself. It always starts with good intentions. We just need a small abstraction for this one thing. But abstraction wants to grow. And complexity, once it gets a foothold, multiplies like ivy on a wall. So what's the lesson? Choose your tools carefully. Don't be afraid to use powerful, mature abstractions from the start, even if they seem too much for now. Don't reinvent the wheel when it's already been battle-tested by decades of experience. And if you do find yourself deep inside your own hand-rolled scripting system, ask yourself, did I build this for clarity? Or, because I avoided facing complexity head-on earlier? Greenspun's law reminds us that ignoring complexity doesn't make it go away. It just means you'll rebuild it anyway, poorly, painfully, and probably with worse documentation. So the next time you find yourself engineering yet another layer of logic to manage what used to be a simple system, pause and ask, is this winning? The part where I accidentally reinvent Lisp? If so, it might be time to step back and start building smarter, not deeper. Dunbar's number. Why you can't maintain more than 150. Real relationships. Think for a moment about all the people in your life. Family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, that old classmate you still message once a year. Now think deeper. How many of those people do you truly know? Not just names and faces, but people you actively keep in touch with, people whose birthdays you remember, whose emotions you notice, whose lives you follow in more than passing likes and emojis. Chances are, that number is somewhere around 150. That's not a coincidence. It's the foundation of a concept known as Dunbar's number. The human brain can only maintain stable social relationships with about 150 people. Coined by British anthropologist Robin Dunbar in the 1990s, this idea stems from a blend of evolutionary biology, neuroscience, and social psychology. Dunbar studied primates and found that species with larger neocortexes could handle larger, social groups. When he applied this to humans, based on brain size and cognitive load, the magic number he found was 150. This number doesn't represent acquaintances or names you recognize. It represents the cognitive and emotional bandwidth required to genuinely maintain relationships, to notice changes in someone's behavior, to understand their context, to invest in their well-being, and what's fascinating is how consistently this number appears across human history. Ancient tribes rarely exceeded 150 members. Beyond that, cohesion started to break down. Military units, from Roman legions to modern companies, often cap at around 120-150 soldiers. Beyond that, you need command structures to maintain order. Villages, historically and even today, tend to feel tight-knit up to that size. Then the social glue begins to stretch. Even holiday card lists or the number of people we'd invite to a personal event rarely go much beyond this limit. In today's digital world, this truth hasn't changed, but it's easier than ever to forget. We're connected to hundreds or thousands of people online. But how many would notice if you disappeared? How many would check in if you went silent? And how many would you truly open up to if something went wrong? Social media gives the illusion of limitless relationships, but our minds haven't evolved for that. What we gain in breadth, we often lose in depth. More followers don't mean more connection. More likes don't equal more love. This is why small teams and companies often outperform large departments. They communicate better, trust faster, and adapt quickly. Close-knit communities thrive with intimacy and shared memory, while large urban centers struggle with loneliness, and why having 5 close friends is more powerful than 500 online contacts. So, what's the takeaway? Don't chase numbers. Chase meaning. If you find yourself trying to maintain too many connections, constantly checking in on people you barely know, or feeling guilty for not responding to every message, pause. Ask yourself, who truly matters? Who brings value, depth, and reciprocity into my life? Then invest there. Because attention is a limited resource, and Dunbar's number isn't a restriction. It's a reminder to focus your energy where it actually counts. In a world overflowing with noise, the ability to nurture deep, stable human relationships isn't just rare, it's radical. Hicklin's Law. When the most sensitive people shape the rules. For everyone, imagine a school where one child has a severe peanut allergy. To protect that student, the school bans all peanut products for everyone. Seems reasonable, right? Now, take that same logic and apply it to speech, art, media, or education. One person finds a book offensive. The book is removed from shelves. One viewer complains about a scene in a movie. The platform pulls it down. One group says a historic statue is triggering. It's taken down without broader discussion. This is the world shaped by Hicklin's Law. Moral rules and restrictions tend to be shaped by the most sensitive members of society. Named after a British legal precedent from the 19th century, Hicklin's Law originated in a court case that defined obscenity not by what a typical adult might tolerate, but by what could corrupt the most vulnerable reader, especially children. If any part of a publication could be considered morally harmful to the most sensitive or impressionable, it could be banned altogether. This set a precedent. Society's moral and legal standards didn't have to reflect the average person. They only had to accommodate the most easily offended. That idea didn't die in the 1800s. In fact, it quietly evolved and embedded itself in modern culture. Media companies now adjust or remove content based on small but highly vocal complaints. Brands alter or cancel ad campaigns due to the disapproval of a minority, even when the broader audience doesn't mind. Curriculums in schools are rewritten to avoid offending anyone, even if that means erasing uncomfortable but important parts of history. The intention behind such decisions often comes from a place of compassion. We want to protect. We want to be inclusive. We want to avoid harm. And those are noble instincts. But Hicklin's Law warns us of the slippery slope. When the most sensitive person in the room becomes the moral compass for everyone, we risk turning entire societies into emotional minefields. The fear of offending anyone leads to over-censorship, creative paralysis, and intellectual stagnation. Progress often depends on confronting discomfort, not avoiding it. The most important books, speeches, and works of art throughout history were often labeled offensive in their time. If Hicklin's standard had ruled the world, many of those voices might have been silenced. So, what's the solution? It's not about ignoring sensitivity. It's about seeking balance. We must protect the vulnerable without letting the vulnerable dictate everything. We must listen to discomfort, but not always legislate around it. We must acknowledge offense, but also preserve expression. A healthy society asks, is this restriction truly necessary for safety, or is it a reaction to discomfort? Are we protecting children or avoiding adult conversations? Are we helping people heal or insulating them from reality? Because the goal of a just culture isn't to make sure no one is ever offended. It's to create space where diverse perspectives, truths, and ideas can coexist, even when they challenge us. So the next time a rule, a ban, or a policy is made in the name of sensitivity, ask, are we dimming the lights for everyone just because one person found them too bright? And if so, it might be time to rethink who gets to control the switch. The principle of least effort. Why people and systems. Take the easiest path you're walking through a mall. To your right is a staircase. To your left, an escalator glides effortlessly upward. You're perfectly capable of taking the stairs, but, like most people, you step onto the escalator without even thinking. That tiny decision, made in a second, reveals something profound about human nature. It's called the principle of least effort. People naturally follow the path of least resistance in thinking and behavior. Coined by linguist and researcher George Zip in the 1940s, this principle started as an observation about language, how we tend to use shorter, simpler words more often than longer ones. Why say automobile when car does the job just as well? But what Zip uncovered stretched far beyond words. It applies to everything. In design, people will click the first link that looks useful. That's why Google's clean, fast interface dominated search. It was simply easier. In food choices, cooking a healthy meal takes planning and effort. But fast food, it's cheap, fast, and convenient. The easier option often wins, even when it's worse for us. In thinking, we rely on mental shortcuts or heuristics to make decisions quickly. We avoid complexity. That's why clickbait headlines work. They serve up fast conclusions without requiring us to think deeply. In productivity. We procrastinate not because we don't care, but because the path to doing something hard feels steep. We open Instagram instead of starting that report, not out of laziness, but because the friction is lower. And this doesn't just apply to individuals, it governs systems, too. Organizations tend to adopt workflows, tools, and cultures that minimize short-term resistance. But over time, these easy choices can lead to long-term inefficiency. Even entire societies follow this principle, defaulting to norms and habits that feel easy in the moment, without questioning their broader impact. But here's the twist. The principle of least effort isn't inherently bad. It's just a law of human behavior. And, like gravity, once you understand how it works, you can use it to your advantage. Want people to use your product? Make the experience frictionless. Reduce steps. Anticipate confusion. Design for clarity. Want to build a new habit? Don't rely on willpower. Lower the barrier. Put your workout clothes out the night before. Pre-cut the veggies. Set a reminder. Remove the tiny obstacles that derail good intentions. Want to be more productive? Simplify your environment. Organize your space. Use templates. Automate repetitive tasks. The easier it is to start, the more likely you will. Because the truth is, most people and most systems don't rise to meet ideal scenarios. They fall to the level of least resistance. So instead of fighting that instinct, design around it. Work with it. Build systems that reward ease without sacrificing integrity. Because at the end of the day, the things that win aren't always the smartest, the healthiest, or the most ethical. The things that win are often just the ones that are easiest to reach. Newton's law of cooling. Why change happens faster. When the gap is wider, you pour yourself a steaming cup of coffee. It's almost too hot to sip, so you leave it on the table. 5 minutes later, you take a taste. It's cooled a lot. But leave it there another 5 minutes, and it only cools a little more. Why? Now imagine the opposite. You take a can of soda out of the fridge and leave it on the counter. At first, it warms quickly, but as it approaches room temperature, the change slows. This isn't coincidence. It's Newton's law of cooling in action. The rate of temperature change of an object is proportional to the difference between the object's temperature and its environment. In simple terms, change happens fastest when the gap is widest. When a hot object meets a cold environment, the energy transfer is rapid. The contrast creates momentum. But as the two temperatures get closer, the urgency of that transfer fades. The system seeks equilibrium, and the pace of change naturally slows. But what makes Newton's law truly fascinating is how it applies far beyond physics. This principle shows up in technology, economics, personal growth, and even societal change. Technology adoption. When the Internet first emerged, its growth was explosive. Huge parts of the world went from zero connectivity to full access in just a few years. But now that the majority of the world is online, adoption has slowed. There are fewer unconnected people to convert, and the systems are nearing saturation. Personal development start going to the gym after years of inactivity, and your progress in the first month is dramatic. Pounds drop, strength increases, energy improves. But after a year of consistent training, each gain becomes smaller. You're no longer far from the goal, so improvement slows. Economic growth-developing nations, when they first industrialize, often experience booms in GDP and infrastructure. But once they catch up with global standards, growth becomes incremental. Just like the coffee and the air, the difference between where they are and where they could be has shrunk. So, what does this tell us? That early wins are natural, but not sustainable. That progress is non-linear, fast at first, then slow and subtle, and that true mastery, True transformation happens after the sprint ends. This is where many people lose motivation. They see the initial excitement fade, the weight loss stalls, the business flattens, the skill plateaus, and they think, I must be doing something wrong. But you're not. You're just entering the second phase of change, the slow burn. In this phase, progress is no longer obvious, but it's deeper. It's in the refinement, the detail, the consistency. It's in the tiny daily decisions that don't make headlines, but that create lasting transformation. So the next time you feel like your momentum is fading, remember Newton's law. Change always slows as you near equilibrium. That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're leveling up. Because true growth isn't about the speed of the shift. It's about staying in motion when the excitement is gone and the finish line is still out of sight. The secret is persistence, not pace.